The wind rolled across the barren hills of Wyoming Territory, carrying dust and broken promises. Dustmere's train station stood like a lone sentinel against the darkening sky of 1874, a single-room shack with a bench too short for sleep and a potbelly stove too rusted for heat. Inside, three men in trail-worn clothes circled Barbara Hart like wolves around wounded prey. Their breath reeked of cheap whiskey, their eyes reflecting the lantern's glow with predatory intent. "Ain't no Ezra Whitlow in these parts," the tallest one sneered, tugging at Barbara's sleeve. She clutched her carpet bag tighter. "But plenty of lonely men would pay good money for a pretty Eastern girl. How about we auction you off proper-like?" "Please," Barbara whispered, backing against the wall. 3 days at this station had left her hollow-eyed and weak. Her remaining coins wouldn't buy passage back east, nor secure another night at the boarding house. "I'm a teacher, not what you're suggesting." The second man grabbed her wrist. "Teacher whore don't matter out here. Women are scarce as rainfall." The station master, an old man with rheumy eyes, half-heartedly protested. "Now boys, leave the lady." "Lady." The third man laughed. "Ain't no lady shows up unchaperoned, claiming to be some man's mail-order bride. That's just a fancy word for—" A gunshot cracked the night air. The men froze as the station door swung open. A tall figure silhouetted against the moonlight held a smoking Colt revolver pointed skyward. "Step away from the woman, ah!" The voice was low, steady, a man accustomed to being obeyed. The drunks backed off, muttering curses as they stumbled into the night. Barbara's savior holstered his weapon, revealing a weathered face framed by dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. He wore no badge, but carried himself with unmistakable authority. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Before Barbara could answer, he nodded to the station master. "Preston, get the lady some water." Only then did Barbara realize she was trembling. The newcomer introduced himself as Matthew Preston, sheriff of Dustmere County. As Barbara sipped tepid water from a tin cup, she explained her situation, how she'd traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man who apparently didn't exist. "Ezra Whitlow," Preston repeated, his expression grim. "You're the third this year. Same name, same promises, of a prosperous ranch near the foothills." Barbara felt the weight of humiliation press upon her shoulders. A teacher with an education from the Boston Female Seminary reduced to a fool's errand. "Who would do such a thing?" she asked. Preston sighed. "Plenty of unsavory characters in these parts. Some find it amusing to lure Eastern women out here." He studied her threadbare coat and scuffed boots. "You have family back east? Anyone who can wire you money for return passage?" Barbara shook her head. "My parents died in the draft riots. I was dismissed from my teaching position for controversial practices." "Controversial?" She lifted her chin. "I taught freed slaves' children alongside whites." The school board disapproved. Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "Quaker family?" "Yes, we were abolitionists." Preston nodded, his expression softening. "Look, Miss Hart, Dustmere isn't Boston. It's rough country populated by rough men. Half the town fought for the Union, half for the Confederacy. Everyone's just trying to rebuild." He hesitated. "The Silver Dollar Saloon needs help. It's not proper work for a lady, but it pays enough to eat." Barbara's pride warred with her empty stomach. "Serving drinks." "Serving drinks," Preston confirmed. "Nothing more on my authority. Give you time to save for a ticket east." She closed her eyes briefly. How had her life come to this, contemplating work in a frontier saloon? But the alternative was starvation, or worse. "Very well," she said quietly. "Thank you." 3 days later, Barbara had learned more about frontier life than in all her 24 years. The Silver Dollar Saloon operated at the intersection of desperation and opportunity, serving miners, cowboys, and railroad men, whose fortunes rose and fell with the territory's boom and bust cycle. Maxwell Grant owned the establishment, along with the bank, the mercantile, and half the surrounding land. A former Confederate colonel with aristocratic bearing, he'd leveraged his pre-war connections to build an empire in the West. His wife Eleanor was a delicate Southern belle who rarely appeared in town. Barbara delivered whiskey and dodged wandering hands with increasing efficiency. Each night she collapsed into a small room behind the kitchen, too exhausted to dwell on how far she'd fallen. On the fourth evening, the saloon doors swung open during a momentary lull. Barbara turned expecting another dusty cowhand, but instead saw a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 5 years old, dressed in oversized boys' clothes, canvas trousers held up by suspenders, a flannel shirt with rolled sleeves and boots that threatened to swallow her tiny feet. Her dark hair was cropped short beneath a flat cap, but nothing could disguise the delicate features or bright, determined eyes. She marched directly to Barbara, ignoring the stares of patrons. "Are you the lady who got left?" the child asked, her voice clear and direct. Barbara blinked in surprise. "Pardon me, the lady who came for a husband but didn't get one. Miss Ellie at the Mercantile said you've got the sad eyes." A few nearby miners chuckled. Barbara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's not a polite question," she said gently, setting down her tray. The girl shrugged. "Don't need polite, need honest." She studied Barbara with unnerving intensity. "My daddy needs a wife. You want the bot?" This time the laughter spread across the saloon. Barbara knelt to the child's level, speaking softly. "Sweetheart, that's not how these things work. Where is your father? You shouldn't be in here alone. He's finishing at the Mercantile. I snuck away." The girl stuck out a small hand. "I'm Maisie Callahan. I'm 5 3/4. "I'm Miss Hart," Barbara replied, unable to resist the child's directness. "And we should get you outside before your father worries." She took Maisie's hand and led her toward the door, conscious of amused stares following them. Outside, twilight painted the single dusty street in shades of purple and gold. Board sidewalks creaked beneath their steps as Barbara scanned for any man who might be searching for a child. "Which way to the Mercantile?" she asked. Before Maisie could answer, a deep voice called from across the street. "Maisie Elizabeth Callahan." A tall man strode toward them, his expression thunderous. He wore simple ranch clothes, faded denim cotton shirt, leather vest, but carried himself with military bearing. A day's growth of beard shadowed his jaw, and a wide-brimmed hat couldn't hide the intensity of his dark eyes. With a jolt, Barbara recognized her rescuer from the train station. Without the shadows of night, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, with lines of grief rather than age marking his face. "What have I told you about wandering off, Zia?" he demanded, reaching them in long strides. Maisie stood her ground. "Found you a wife, Daddy?" The man froze his gaze, snapping to Barbara. His eyes narrowed in recognition, then darkened with misunderstanding as he noted her saloon attire. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "I appreciate you bringing my daughter out, but I'll thank you not to fill her head with nonsense." Barbara straightened. "I did no such thing. Your daughter came into the saloon alone and approached me. I was removing her from an inappropriate environment." "Is that what they call soliciting these days?" The accusation struck like a physical blow. Barbara stepped back, her face burning. "I am a teacher, sir, not what you're implying. And your daughter needs better supervision if she's wandering into saloons alone." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her educated speech. Sheriff Preston's voice cut through the tension. "Thomas Callahan, I see you've met Miss Hart." The men exchanged nods of recognition. Preston continued. "Miss Hart is our newest resident victim of that mail-order bride scheme I mentioned. She's working at the saloon temporarily while awaiting passage east." Thomas Callahan's expression shifted subtly. "My apologies for the misunderstanding," he said stiffly. Maisie apologized for bothering the lady. "Wasn't bothering," Maisie protested. "Was helping. She needs a home, you need a wife. It's simple." Preston chuckled, but Thomas Callahan did not. He reached into his pocket and pressed a silver dollar into Barbara's hand. "For your trouble," he said. Barbara tried to return it. "That's unnecessary." "Keep it," he insisted. "Maisie, come along. We're already late." The girl reluctantly took her father's hand, but looked back at Barbara. "We live out by Broken Creek. It's pretty there." As they walked away, Preston sighed. "That's Thomas Callahan. Owns a homestead about 5 miles out. Lost his wife when Maisie was born. Was a Union lieutenant colonel at Gettysburg. Man hasn't spoken more than 10 words together since the war ended." Barbara watched them go, the silver dollar heavy in her palm. "He saved me from those men at the station." "Did he now?" Preston raised an eyebrow. "That's the most neighborly thing I've heard of him doing in years." A commotion from the saloon drew their attention, raised voices breaking glass. Preston shook his head. Friday night's starting early. Better get back in there, Miss Hart. These boys get rowdy when they're kept waiting. Barbara nodded, tucking the coin into her pocket. As she turned back toward the saloon doors, the weight of her circumstances pressed down once more. The following afternoon, Barbara stood behind the mercantile washing her only other dress in a bucket of cold water. Her hands were raw from lye soap, her back aching from hours of carrying trays. A week of such work would earn her enough for a room at the boarding house, but the train ticket east would take months. Miss Hart, she turned to find Maisie Callahan watching her from atop a stack of empty crates, still dressed in her boy's clothes. It's Hart, Barbara corrected gently. What are you doing here alone again, Maisie? Daddy's getting supplies. The girl hopped down with surprising agility. Why are you washing your clothes in a bucket? Because I need clean clothes and don't have money for the Chinese laundry. Maisie considered this. At our ranch, we have a big wash tub and a clothesline that goes all the way to the barn. That sounds very convenient. You could use it if you came home with us. Barbara smiled despite herself. Your father doesn't want a wife, Maisie, especially not one he just met. He doesn't know what he wants, Maisie said with startling conviction. He just looks at Mama's picture and writes letters he never sends. The simple observation carried such raw truth that Barbara paused in her washing. Your mother must have been very special, she said carefully. Maisie shrugged. Don't remember her. She died when I was born. She said this matter-of-factly without self-pity. Daddy said she was from Georgia, had yellow hair like sunshine. Barbara's heart ached for this strange, solemn child who spoke of tragedy with such resignation. I'm sorry, Maisie. Not your fault. The girl kicked at the dirt. Daddy needs someone to talk to besides me and the horses. There must be nice ladies in town. No, Maisie said forcefully. Town ladies want our land or Daddy's money. You just need a place to stay. Before Barbara could respond, Thomas Callahan rounded the corner, arms laden with supplies. He stopped short at the sight of them. Maisie, he said wearily, what did I tell you about bothering Miss Hart? Wasn't bothering, Maisie insisted. Was inviting. She's washing clothes in a bucket, Daddy. Thomas glanced at Barbara's reddened hands, then at the sodden dress. Something unreadable crossed his features. Miss Hart, my daughter seems determined too. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. It's fine, Mr. Callahan, Barbara assured him. Children speak their minds. He nodded, then hesitated. My daughter mentioned you're in need of better arrangements. I'm managing, Barbara said, pride stiffening her spine. Thomas shifted the packages in his arms. We have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's private. You could stay a few days, until the next train east. Barbara stared, certain she'd misheard. I beg your pardon. Maisie needs schooling, he continued awkwardly. I've tried, but I'm not. We could exchange room and board for lessons, just until the train comes. The offer stunned her. Was this the same cold man who'd accused her of solicitation just yesterday? Maisie beamed. See, told you, Thomas gave his daughter a stern look. It's Miss Hart's decision, Maisie. Barbara considered her options. The saloon room was barely larger than a closet, the work degrading. But going to a stranger's isolated homestead carried its own risks. Why would you help me? She asked directly. Thomas met her gaze. I've seen what happens to women stranded here without means. And Maisie needs, he glanced at his daughter, female influence. Preston's words echoed in Barbara's mind, Union Lieutenant Colonel at Gettysburg. Perhaps there was still honor left in this war-hardened man. When is the next eastbound train? She asked. 2 weeks, Thomas replied. Stage Depot said they're repairing track after the spring floods. 2 weeks of proper sleep and distance from groping hands versus months of saloon work. The choice seemed obvious, yet Barbara hesitated. Something about Thomas Callahan unnerved her. Not fear exactly, but awareness of depths she couldn't fathom. I accept, she said finally, but I'll earn my keep. I can cook and clean besides teaching Maisie. Relief flickered across his face, quickly masked. Fine, we'll leave once I've finished my business. He turned to go, then paused. Sheriff Preston vouches for your character. I expect you'll do the same for mine. With that cryptic statement, he strode away, leaving Barbara to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake or found temporary salvation. Maisie grinned triumphantly. Told you he needed a wife. I'm not becoming your father's wife, Barbara clarified firmly. Just a temporary teacher. The girl's smile didn't fade. That's how it always starts in stories. Thomas Callahan's wagon rumbled over rutted trails that barely deserved the name road. Barbara sat beside him on the wooden bench, Maisie wedged between them, chattering endlessly about the ranch her pony named Scout and the three-legged dog that kept the barn free of rats. Barbara had collected her meager belongings and left a note for the saloon owner. Now as they crested a rise revealing the vast emptiness of the Wyoming landscape, she wondered if she'd traded one form of vulnerability for another. Thomas barely spoke, responding to his daughter's questions with grunts or single-word answers. The silence between the adults stretched uncomfortably until Barbara broke it. Have you lived in Wyoming territory long? Mr. Callahan. He glanced at her. 7 years. Since the war ended, she noted. His hands tightened on the reins. Yes. Were you at Appomattox for the surrender? Yes. After a moment, he added, wasn't much of a victory watching men you'd fought for years hand over their swords. Just tired soldiers wanting to go home. It was the longest statement he'd made yet. Encouraged, Barbara continued, my father said the same about war, that there are no true victors. Your father served Mexican War. He was a field surgeon. Thomas nodded, a hint of respect in his posture. Brave profession, harder than fighting sometimes. The wagon dipped into a shallow creek water, splashing around the wheels. As they emerged on the other side, the landscape changed. A valley opened before them, bordered by rocky hills. A stream curved through meadowland, and in the distance stood a sturdy two-story house flanked by a large barn and several outbuildings. There it is, Maisie announced proudly, our ranch. Barbara was surprised by the homestead's substantial size. She'd expected a crude cabin, not this established operation with fenced pastures where horses grazed. It's larger than I imagined, she said. Was a stagecoach stop before the railroad, Thomas explained. Previous owner built it big, then went bust. We use the extra rooms for storage now. As they approached, Barbara noted the property's contradictions. The house was solidly built but needed paint. The barn was large, but one door hung crooked. The garden was well planned but partially overgrown. It was a place maintained for function rather than appearance, reflecting its owner's pragmatic nature. They pulled up to the house just as the sun began its descent. Thomas helped Barbara down from the wagon with impersonal courtesy, then began unloading supplies while Maisie dragged Barbara toward the front door. Come see my room, the girl insisted, and where you'll sleep. The house's interior revealed similar contrasts. The furnishings were good quality, suggesting Thomas had means beyond the average homesteader, but there was a masculine austerity to the rooms. No curtains in the windows, no cushions adorned the wooden chairs. The floors were swept clean, but a fine layer of dust covered the higher shelves. Maisie led Barbara upstairs to a room at the end of the hallway. This is yours, she announced, pushing open the door. Barbara stepped into a chamber frozen in time. Unlike the rest of the house, this room had been maintained meticulously. A woman's hairbrush and hand mirror lay on the dresser, a blue shawl draped over a rocking chair, a porcelain pitcher and basin sat on a washstand. The bed was made with a quilt of intricate design. This was your mother's room, Barbara said softly, recognizing the shrine for what it was. Maisie nodded. Daddy keeps it just like when she was here. Says you can use it 'cause you're a lady too. Barbara's discomfort grew. Sleeping in a dead woman's preserved bedroom felt wrong, invasive. Heavy footsteps announced Thomas's arrival. He stood in the doorway watching Barbara's reaction. It's the only proper guest room, he said, misinterpreting her hesitation. Everything's clean. It's very kind, Barbara managed, but perhaps there's another. The other rooms are storage or not fit for habitation. His tone brooked no argument. I'll bring your bag up. He disappeared down the hallway. Maisie tugged at Barbara's sleeve. Come see my room next. It's across the hall. The child's room offered stark contrast, chaotic lived in, with clothes strewn about and childish drawings pinned to the walls. A rag doll missing one button eye lay abandoned on the floor beside a wooden horse. No feminine touches softened this space. It could have belonged to a young boy. Daddy says I can learn to read proper with you teaching, Maisie said, bouncing on her unmade bed. He tries, but he gets frustrated when I mix up letters. Does your father read to you? Maisie nodded. Bible stories mostly, and sometimes from his army books. Army books. about battles and strategies. He says they're not for little girls, but I like the maps. Thomas appeared in the doorway, Barbara's carpet bag in hand. Supper in an hour, he said. Maisie, let Miss Hart rest. You can pester her with questions tomorrow. After they left, Barbara stood alone in Mary Callahan's preserved bedroom, feeling like an intruder. Framed on the wall hung a daguerreotype of a beautiful young woman with fair hair and a gentle smile. Mary Callahan looked nothing like Barbara, with her dark hair and serious features. She opened the wardrobe and found dresses still hanging inside calico for everyday wear, a fine silk for special occasions. 7 years, and Thomas Callahan still kept his wife's clothes. Barbara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly uncertain of her decision. This wasn't simply a lonely widower's home. It was a mausoleum. And Thomas Callahan was not merely reserved. He was a man haunted by ghosts. The question was whether those ghosts would allow her even temporary sanctuary, or if she'd inadvertently stepped into a tragedy still unfolding. Supper was a simple affair of salt pork beans and cornbread. Thomas ate mechanically, his attention focused on his plate. Maisie dominated the conversation, peppering Barbara with questions about Boston train travel and whether she knew how to ride a horse. I rode in the city parks occasionally, Barbara admitted. Nothing like your Western ponies, I'm sure. Scout can teach you, Maisie declared. He's gentle with ladies. Thomas cleared his throat. Miss Hart won't be here long enough to need riding lessons. The statement dampened Maisie's enthusiasm momentarily. But what if she likes it here and wants to stay? Maisie, her father warned. Barbara intervened smoothly. I have obligations back east, Maisie, but I'm looking forward to our lessons while I'm here. What will you teach me first? The girl asked eagerly. Well, let's assess what you already know. Can you recite your letters? Maisie launched into an alphabet song, mixing up several letters and inverting others. Barbara noted the difficulties, classic signs of what newer educational theories identified as reading difficulties, not lack of intelligence. Very good, she encouraged. Tomorrow we'll work with individual letters. It's easier to learn them in small groups. Thomas watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. When they'd finished eating, he stood. I have work in the barn. Maisie helped Miss Hart clear up then bed. After he'd gone, Barbara and Maisie washed the dishes together. The domestic task felt oddly comforting after days of uncertainty. Daddy's not usually so quiet, Maisie confided as she dried a plate. He talks more when it's just us. It's natural to be reserved around strangers, Barbara assured her. You're not a stranger now. You're our teacher. Barbara smiled at the child's simple logic. It takes time to get comfortable with new people. Later, after helping Maisie prepare for bed, Barbara found herself drawn to the front porch. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Stars crowded the vast Wyoming sky, more than she'd ever seen in Boston's gas-lit nights. Movement caught her attention, Thomas emerging from the barn, a lantern casting long shadows before him. He carried something under his arm, perhaps a book or ledger. His posture spoke of exhaustion. He noticed her on the porch and paused, then changed direction to approach the house. Everything satisfactory? He asked, setting the lantern on the porch rail. Yes, thank you. It's peaceful here. He nodded, looking out toward the distant hills rather than at her. Maisie settled. Yes, she's bright, Mr. Callahan. Her difficulty with letters doesn't reflect her intelligence. Something in his stance eased slightly. Mary, my wife, she said the same. That Maisie would be clever. He paused. I've tried teaching her, but I haven't the patience or knowledge. Some children see letters differently. There are methods to help. Thomas nodded again. After a moment's silence, he said, I apologize for my assumption in town about your profession. Apology accepted. Preston explained your circumstances. It was wrong what happened to you. Barbara wrapped her arms around herself against the cooling night. Life rarely follows our plans, does it, Mr. Callahan? He met her gaze briefly. No, Miss Hart, it does not. In that moment of shared understanding, Barbara felt the first bridge across the gulf between them, not friendship but recognition of common experience. They were both survivors of life's cruel turns. Good night, Mr. Callahan. Good night, Miss Hart. As she climbed the stairs to Mary's room, Barbara felt the day's tension begin to unwind. Whatever strangeness existed in this household, whatever ghosts lingered, she'd found temporary refuge from harder circumstances. For now, that would have to be enough. Dawn broke over the Callahan Ranch with golden determination. Barbara woke to unfamiliar bird calls and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, she lay disoriented in Mary Callahan's bed, beneath Mary Callahan's quilt, before remembering her circumstances. She dressed quickly in her one good remaining dress, smoothed her hair into its customary severe bun, and ventured downstairs. To her surprise, Thomas was already at the stove frying bacon while coffee bubbled in a battered pot. "Good morning," she offered. He glanced up. "Coffee's ready. Maisie's still abed. Girl would sleep till noon if allowed." Barbara poured herself coffee in a chipped mug. "What time do you typically start lessons?" "Never had a schedule." Thomas flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency. "Taught her when work allowed. I'll establish regular hours. Structure benefits learning." He nodded, seeming relieved to relinquish this responsibility. "I'll be mending fences on the north pasture today. Won't be back till supper." They ate in relative silence until Maisie appeared hair-tousled, still in her nightgown. She brightened at the sight of Barbara. "You're still here, I thought. Maybe I dreamed it." Barbara smiled. "Very much real and ready to begin your lessons after breakfast." Thomas rose, placing his plate in the wash basin. "Mind Miss Hart today," he told his daughter. "Do your lessons proper." After he'd gone, Barbara helped Maisie dress, noting again the lack of typically feminine attire. The girl owned a single dress, moth-eaten, and too small, which she adamantly refused to wear. "Ladies wear dresses," Barbara said gently. "Don't want to be a lady," Maisie declared. "Ladies die like mama." The stark statement revealed volumes about the child's understanding of her mother's death. Barbara didn't press the issue, instead helping Maisie into her preferred trousers and shirt. They spent the morning at the kitchen table working with letters cut from cardboard. Barbara quickly confirmed her suspicion that Maisie reversed certain letters B and D, P, and Q, a common difficulty that required specific teaching approaches. By midday, Maisie could successfully identify a dozen letters without confusion. Her pride in this accomplishment was palpable. "Can we show Daddy when he comes back?" she asked. "Of course," Barbara agreed. "Now let's break for lunch and then I'll help you with chores." "You don't have to do chores," Maisie said, surprised. "You're a guest." "I prefer to earn my keep," Barbara explained. "Besides, I need to learn my way around if I'm staying 2 weeks. After a simple lunch of bread and preserves, Maisie led Barbara on a tour of the property. The barn housed 6 horses, including Maisie's beloved Scout, a gentle pinto pony with patient eyes. Several cows grazed in a nearby pasture, and chickens scratched in a fenced yard. "It's quite an operation for your father to manage alone," Barbara observed. "He hires men sometimes," Maisie explained, "for roundup or harvest. Says he doesn't trust most folks enough to keep them on permanent." They were collecting eggs when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. 3 riders approached the house, 2 rough-looking men flanking an older gentleman in a fine suit and hat. "That's Mr. Grant," Maisie whispered, shrinking against Barbara. "Daddy doesn't like him." Maxwell Grant dismounted with the stiff dignity of a man unaccustomed to physical labor. His silver hair and neatly trimmed beard gave him a distinguished appearance, but his eyes were cold and assessing as they fell on Barbara. "Well now," he drawled, his accent thick with Southern heritage. "Thomas didn't mention he had company." Barbara straightened egg basket in hand. "I'm Miss Hart, temporarily employed as Maisie's teacher." Grant removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Maxwell Grant, ma'am. I own the bank in Dustmere, among other enterprises." His gaze swept over her, lingering inappropriately. "Curious employment for a woman of your quality." Something in his tone raised Barbara's defenses. "Mr. Callahan is in the north pasture," she said, deliberately misinterpreting his interest. "If you have business with him." Grant smiled thinly. "My business can wait. I merely stopped to make another offer on this property." He gestured expansively. "Railroad's coming through next year. This land will be worth triple once the route's announced. I don't believe Mr. Callahan is interested in selling. Every man has his price, Miss Hart." Grant replaced his hat. "Even stubborn ex-Union officers with more pride than sense." The statement contained unmistakable hostility. Barbara placed a protective hand on Maisie's shoulder. "I'll tell him you called," she said firmly. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly, then he inclined his head. "Do that, and mention that my offer stands at $3,000. Won't go higher even for land with special features." Something in his emphasis suggested hidden meaning. Before Barbara could respond, Grant remounted his horse with surprising agility for his age. "Good day, Miss Hart. A pleasure making your acquaintance." He tipped his hat, then added with deliberate provocation, "Give my regards to your employer. Tell him the South remembers its debts." As the riders departed, Barbara felt Maisie trembling against her. "I don't like him," the child whispered. "He makes Daddy angry." Barbara watched the dust trail of the departing riders. "Why does Mr. Grant want your father's land so badly?" Maisie shrugged. "Daddy says some men can't stop fighting wars even when they're supposed to be over." The simple observation carried uncomfortable truth. Barbara had seen the same in Boston men who couldn't leave battlefield animosities behind, who carried their grievances into peacetime like cherished heirlooms. Whatever lay between Thomas Callahan and Maxwell Grant went deeper than a land dispute, and Barbara had just placed herself squarely in the middle of it. Thomas returned at dusk, his clothing dust-covered, his expression tightening, when Barbara mentioned Grant's visit. "What did he want?" he asked, washing his hands in the kitchen basin with unnecessary force. "To offer $3,000 for the ranch," Barbara replied. "He mentioned the railroad coming through." Thomas snorted. "Railroad's going 10 miles south. Grant knows it. He wants this land for other reasons. He said something about special features." Thomas froze momentarily, then continued drying his hands. "Grant talks too much." He glanced toward Maisie, who was setting the table. "We'll discuss it later." During dinner, Maisie proudly demonstrated her improved letter recognition. Thomas watched with genuine surprise as his daughter correctly identified letters that had confounded her just days earlier. "She has a natural aptitude," Barbara explained. "She just needs consistent methods." For the first time, Thomas directed a look of unguarded gratitude toward Barbara. "You've done more in a day than I managed in months." The simple acknowledgement warmed her unexpectedly. After Maisie was tucked in bed, Barbara found Thomas on the porch smoking a pipe and staring into the gathering darkness. She hesitated, then joined him, maintaining a proper distance. "Grant seemed quite determined," she ventured. Thomas exhaled smoke slowly. "Grant was a Confederate colonel, lost everything in the war, came west with Northern investors' money, built himself back up, buying distressed properties. And yours is one he wants. Has been for 3 years. Thomas tapped his pipe against the railing. "It started at $500. Keeps raising his offer, despite my refusals." "Why is he so persistent about this particular property?" Thomas studied her, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "My wife's father owned this land before the war. Mary inherited it. When we married, it became mine legally, though I always considered it hers. I don't understand the connection to Mr. Grant. Mary's father owed Grant money. Grant believes the debt transferred with the property." Thomas's voice hardened. "I disagree." Barbara sensed there was more to the story. "Does this have anything to do with the war?" Grant mentioned the South remembering its debts. A muscle ticked in Thomas's jaw. "Grant and I have history. Appomattox wasn't our first meeting. You fought against each other." In a manner of speaking, he fell silent, clearly unwilling to elaborate. Barbara changed tactics. "Maisie mentioned you hire seasonal help. Perhaps with my teaching wages, you could afford more permanent assistance." Thomas looked at her sharply. "I'm not taking your money, Miss Hart. The arrangement is room and board for teaching. But the subject is closed." His tone was final. They stood in uncomfortable silence until Barbara said quietly, "Maisie refuses to wear dresses. Says ladies die like her mother." The statement hit Thomas like a physical blow. He stared into the darkness, his profile rigid. "Mary hemorrhaged," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Childbirth. Nothing the doctor could do." He swallowed hard. Maisie was in the room, too young to remember, but somehow she knows. "Children absorb more than we realize," Barbara said gently. "She needs to understand it wasn't being a woman that caused her mother's death." "And how am I supposed to explain that?" Thomas demanded, sudden anger flaring. "I'm a failed farmer who couldn't even get his wife proper medical care. I'm not equipped to raise a daughter alone, much less explain the mysteries of womanhood." The raw admission hung between them. Barbara chose her next words carefully. "You're doing better than you think, Mr. Callahan. Maisie is strong, honest, and kind. Those qualities reflect her upbringing." Thomas shook his head. "She deserves better than what I can give her." Then let me help while I'm here, Barbara offered. Not just with letters, but with the things a girl should know. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Very well, Miss Hart. But remember you're leaving on the next train east. Don't make promises to my daughter you can't keep. With that warning, he knocked his pipe empty and disappeared into the house, leaving Barbara alone with the vast Wyoming night and the unsettling awareness that the Callahan Ranch harbored secrets deeper than a widower's grief. The next morning dawned with ominous clouds building over the distant mountains. Barbara rose early, determined to establish a proper routine. She found the kitchen empty, but a fire already burning in the stove. Through the window, she spotted Thomas in the corral working with a spirited bay horse that pranced and resisted the saddle. Even at a distance, his expertise was evident. He moved with the calm assurance of a man who understood animals, his gestures economical yet gentle. The horse gradually settled under his handling, accepting both saddle and rider without further protest. Barbara watched, oddly fascinated by this glimpse of Thomas Callahan's skill. Here was a competence she hadn't expected: patience rather than forced persuasion instead of dominance. He's good with wild things. Barbara startled at Maisie's voice beside her. The girl stood in her nightgown, hair tousled from sleep, watching her father with obvious pride. Your father seems very capable, Barbara agreed. He says animals are honest, people lie. Maisie yawned. Are we having lessons today? After breakfast, go wash and dress while I prepare something. As Barbara mixed batter for Johnny cakes, she contemplated Maisie's simple observation. Thomas Callahan clearly preferred the company of animals to people, except for his daughter. What experiences had taught him such wariness? The war, perhaps, or events after? By the time Thomas entered the kitchen, breakfast was on the table and Maisie sat freshly scrubbed, if still dressed in her customary boy's clothes. You didn't need to cook, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. I'm earning my keep, Barbara replied. Besides, I enjoy having a proper kitchen after days at the boarding house. He nodded, accepting her explanation without further comment. As they ate, Barbara outlined her teaching plans. I'd like to establish regular lessons in the mornings, followed by practical applications in the afternoons. Reading is important, but Maisie should also learn household management, simple mathematics through daily tasks, and natural sciences through observation. Thomas listened attentively, showing more interest than she'd expected. Sounds thorough. Mary always said education was freedom, especially for women. Your wife was correct. Knowledge provides options beyond marriage or service. A shadow crossed his face. Mary never had those options. Southern women of her class were expected to marry young, raise children, manage households. Yet she married a Northerner, Barbara observed. After the war changed everything. He pushed back from the table. I need to check the western fence line today. Storm's coming. After he'd gone, Barbara and Maisie cleared the breakfast dishes together. Your father mentioned your mother was from the South, she ventured carefully. Georgia, I believe you said. Maisie nodded. Savannah. Daddy says it's a city with big trees covered in Spanish moss, whatever that is. It's like gray curtains hanging from the branches, Barbara explained. Quite beautiful, though I've only seen drawings. Daddy met Mama after the war. Her family lost everything and she was teaching piano to earn money. Maisie recited this as if it were a familiar story. He says she played like an angel. Barbara digested this information. A Southern belle reduced to giving music lessons, marrying a Union officer, it must have scandalized both families. Do you have any of your mother's things, besides her room, I mean? Maisie brightened. Her piano? It's in the parlor, but nobody plays it. Daddy won't let anyone touch it except to dust. She grabbed Barbara's hand. Come see. The parlor was a seldom-used room at the front of the house. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light, lending the space a funereal atmosphere. In the center stood a rosewood piano, its surface immaculate amid the general neglect of the room. Daddy brought it all the way from Georgia, Maisie said proudly. Took 6 men and 2 wagons. Barbara approached the instrument reverently. May I? Maisie bit her lip. Daddy might get mad. I won't play it, just look. She lifted the fallboard to reveal pristine ivory keys. Sheet music sat in this rack, Chopin's Nocturnes open to Opus 9 No. 2 in E-flat major. A challenging piece that spoke to Mary Callahan's considerable talent. Barbara lowered the fallboard gently. Your mother must have been very accomplished. Daddy says music died with her, Maisie said matter-of-factly. That's why we don't have singing or nothing. The statement pierced Barbara's heart. No wonder the house felt so silent, so empty of joy. Thomas had buried not just his wife, but all expressions of beauty along with her. Do you like music, Maisie? The girl nodded vigorously. When I go to town with Daddy, sometimes the saloon has a piano player. I listen from outside. She looked down. Daddy doesn't know. Barbara made a decision, then one small act of rebellion against the mausoleum atmosphere. Let's begin our lessons, but this afternoon I'll teach you a simple song. Not on the piano, she added hastily, seeing Maisie's alarm. Just singing. Your father needn't know if it makes you uncomfortable. Maisie's eyes widened with conspiratorial delight. A secret? A surprise, Barbara corrected, for when the time is right. The morning's lessons progressed well. Maisie proved a quick study once given proper methods. By noon, they'd covered several letters and begun simple word formation. The child's pride in her accomplishments was touching. After lunch, Barbara proposed a new activity. Today, we'll learn about measurements and proportions through cooking. We're going to make bread. Maisie watched fascinated as Barbara explained fractions using cups of flour and teaspoons of salt. The tactile lesson engaged the girl, completely feeling the dough's texture change as they kneaded, observing how it doubled in size during rising. While the bread baked, filling the kitchen with its homey aroma, Barbara fulfilled her promise of a music lesson. She taught Maisie a simple folk song, Barbara Allen, coaching her through the melody in hushed tones. The girl proved to have a sweet, clear voice and quick ear. Mama sang to me, she revealed. Daddy said so. Before I was born, she'd sing, and I'd kick. The bread emerged from the oven golden and fragrant, just as the promised storm arrived. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder rolled across the valley. Barbara worried about Thomas still out checking fences. Will your father be all right in this weather? Maisie seemed unconcerned. Daddy always comes home, even in the worst storms. She inhaled the bread's aroma appreciatively. Can we have some now? They were enjoying warm slices with fresh butter when the front door burst open. Thomas entered, drenched and mud-spattered, his expression thunderous. Grant's men cut my fence line, he announced without preamble. Let 3 head of cattle onto his property. Now he's claiming they're his. Barbara rose. That's theft. That's Grant. Thomas removed his dripping coat. He'll do anything to force my hand. Can't the sheriff help? Preston tries, but he can't be everywhere. Grant owns half the county officials anyway. He noticed the fresh bread and paused. You baked, we baked, Barbara corrected. Maisie is learning fractions through practical application. Something in Thomas's rigid posture softened slightly. Smells good. Sit, eat, then tell me more about the situation with Grant. To her surprise, he complied, accepting a thick slice slathered with butter. His first bite produced a small sound of appreciation that pleased Barbara disproportionately. This is real bread, he said, not that store-bought stuff. Maisie measured everything perfectly, Barbara noted, watching the girl beam with pride. They ate in companionable silence until Thomas had taken the edge off his hunger. Then, as if reaching a decision, he said, Grant wants this land because of what's beneath it. The special features he mentioned. Thomas nodded. Mary's father discovered gold in the creek bed. Small deposit, but pure. He kept it secret, working it himself slowly so as not to start a rush. He glanced at Maisie, who was clearly familiar with this story. Before he died, he gave Mary a map showing the exact location. That map is what Grant really wants. Barbara processed this revelation. How does Grant know about it? Mary's father borrowed money from him during the war, bragged about the gold when drunk. Grant's been hunting for it ever since, convinced it's a major strike rather than a modest deposit. Is it, Thomas shrugged, enough to secure Maisie's future, not enough to justify Grant's obsession? He tore off another piece of bread. The irony is, I couldn't care less about gold. This land was Mary's legacy to our daughter. That's what matters. Barbara considered the implications. Grant seems dangerous. Have you considered selling and starting fresh elsewhere for Maisie's safety? Running isn't my way, Thomas said firmly. Besides, this was Mary's home. Our home now. Even if staying puts you both at risk. His expression hardened. I've faced worse than Maxwell Grant. The conversation was interrupted by a pounding at the door. Thomas rose instinctively, placing himself between the door and Maisie. "Stay back," he ordered, reaching for the rifle mounted above the fireplace. Barbara gathered Maisie close as Thomas approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. "Preston," came the muffled reply. "Let me in, Callahan, before I drown." Thomas lowered the rifle and opened the door. Sheriff Preston entered, rain streaming from his hat and coat. "Sorry to disturb your evening," he said, nodding to Barbara and Maisie. "We've got trouble." "Grant's men," Thomas guessed. "Worse, Grant himself filed a complaint. Claims you threatened his workers at gunpoint this morning. Wants you arrested for assault and intimidation." Thomas's face darkened. "That's a damned lie. I was mending fences all day." "I believe you," Preston said, "but Grant's got 2 men swearing otherwise. Judge Harmon issued a summons. You're to appear Monday morning." "That's 3 days from now," Barbara protested. "Surely Mr. Callahan's word counts for something." Preston gave her an appraising look. It would help if he had an alibi, someone who could verify his whereabouts. "I saw him leave at dawn," Barbara offered. "He said he was checking the western fence line." "Saw him working with a horse early this morning too," Preston noted. "But we need someone who saw him during the alleged incident, around noon at the north property line." Maisie piped up. "Miss Hart and I were making bread then. We didn't see Daddy until just now." Preston sighed. "That's what I feared. It's your word against Grant's men, Thomas." "It's always been," Thomas replied grimly. "What happens if Mr. Callahan is found guilty?" Barbara asked. "Fine at minimum, possibly jail time given their claims of threatening behavior." Preston removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Grant's playing hardball. He wants you desperate enough to sell." Thomas's jaw clenched. "I won't give him the satisfaction." "There may be another option," Barbara suggested. "If these men claim they saw Mr. Callahan at noon, perhaps someone else saw them elsewhere at the same time, proving they couldn't have encountered him." Preston considered this. "Not bad thinking, Miss Hart. Grant's men frequent the Silver Dollar. Might be worth asking around." He replaced his hat. "I'll do what I can, Thomas, but prepare for Monday." After Preston departed, Thomas paced the kitchen like a caged animal. "Grant's getting bolder. First my cattle, now false accusations." "What will you do?" Barbara asked quietly. "Fight. It's all I know how to do, Mom." He glanced at Maisie, who watched him with worried eyes. "Don't fret, little one. Preston will sort this out." But his reassurance rang hollow. As the storm raged outside, Barbara sensed a different tempest gathering, one that threatened to engulf the fragile sanctuary she'd found at the Callahan Ranch. The following morning, Thomas announced his intention to ride into town. "Need to speak with Judge Harmon before the hearing. Man owes me a fair listen, at least." "I'll accompany you," Barbara decided. "I need supplies for Maisie's lessons." Thomas frowned. "Town's no place for a lady," she finished. "Mr. Callahan, I survived Boston's worst neighborhoods teaching freed slaves' children. I believe I can manage Dustmere." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Very well. Be ready in an hour." The journey to town was tense, Thomas brooding silently while Barbara and Maisie shared the wagon seat beside him. The storm had passed, leaving mud-slicked roads and puddles that reflected the clearing sky. Dustmere appeared transformed in daylight, a bustling frontier town striving for respectability. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, their weathered boards proclaiming businesses from blacksmithing to banking. Women in practical calico dresses hurried along board sidewalks, while men in varying states of trail dust conducted commerce or lounged outside the saloon. Maxwell Grant's influence was evident everywhere. The largest building bore his name above Bank and Mercantile, while the Silver Dollar Saloon prominently displayed "Property of Grant Enterprises" on its swinging doors. Thomas halted the wagon before the courthouse, a relatively imposing 2-story structure. "I'll see the judge first, then meet you at the general store." He hesitated. "Best avoid the south side of town. Grant's men favor those establishments." Barbara nodded, understanding his concern. As Thomas strode toward the courthouse, she and Maisie headed for the Mercantile. Inside, they found a treasure trove of goods, everything from calico fabric to cast-iron cookware. While Barbara examined primers and slates for Maisie's lessons, the girl gravitated toward a display of colorful hair ribbons. "These are pretty," Maisie said, wistfully fingering a blue satin ribbon. "Would you like one?" Barbara asked. Maisie shook her head. "Daddy says decorations are wasteful." The shopkeeper, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, approached. Well, if it isn't Maisie Callahan and all grown up, she peered at Barbara. And you must be the teacher Sheriff Preston mentioned. Ellie Jenkins, ma'am, proprietor of this establishment. Barbara Hart, she confirmed. I need supplies for Maisie's education. Heard you're staying out at the Callahan place, Ellie said, her tone suggesting this was unusual. Brave woman. Mr. Callahan has been a perfect gentleman, Barbara replied firmly. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Not what I meant, dear. That house has a reputation. Mary Callahan's ghost walks those halls, folks say. Maisie looked up sharply. My mama's not a ghost. She's an angel. Daddy said so. Ellie patted the girl's head condescendingly. Of course, child. Now about those supplies. As the shopkeeper gathered primers and paper, Barbara noticed a well-dressed woman entering the store. Her elegant attire and refined bearing marked her as someone of means unusual in this frontier town. The newcomer spotted them and approached with gracious confidence. You must be Miss Hart. I'm Eleanor Grant. Barbara tensed at the name but maintained her composure. Mrs. Grant, how do you do? Eleanor Grant was perhaps 40 with delicate features and eyes that missed nothing. I understand you're teaching young Maisie. She smiled at the girl. How wonderful to see you in town, my dear. That ribbon would look lovely in your hair. To Barbara's surprise, Maisie didn't shy away from Maxwell Grant's wife. Instead, she offered a shy smile. Miss Ellie lets me look sometimes, Maisie confided, but Daddy says they're too fancy. Nonsense, Eleanor declared. Every girl deserves pretty things. She turned to the shopkeeper. Add that blue ribbon to my account, Ellie. A gift for Maisie. Barbara started to protest, but Eleanor raised a hand. Please, Miss Hart, allow me this small kindness. My husband and Thomas Callahan may have their differences, but children shouldn't suffer for adults' quarrels. There was something in the woman's manner, a genuine warmth beneath the social polish that made Barbara relent. That's very generous, Mrs. Grant. Eleanor lowered her voice. I've heard about the situation. Max can be terribly stubborn when he wants something. Her eyes conveyed more than her words. Perhaps we could speak privately sometime. Woman to woman. Before Barbara could respond, the store's door flew open. Thomas stood in the entrance, his expression darkening when he saw Eleanor Grant conversing with Barbara and Maisie. Time to go, he announced curtly. Eleanor turned with practiced composure. Thomas, how lovely to see you. I was just introducing myself to Miss Hart. Thomas gave a terse nod. Mrs. Grant, I do hope you'll reconsider Max's offer, she said smoothly. For everyone's sake. My answer remains the same. Thomas's tone brooked no discussion. Maisie, Miss Hart were leaving. Barbara gathered their purchases, including the blue ribbon Mrs. Grant had insisted on gifting. As they exited, Eleanor called after them, Miss Hart, my invitation stands. Tea anytime. Outside, Thomas loaded their supplies into the wagon with barely contained anger. What did she want? To be kind to your daughter, Barbara replied, helping Maisie into the wagon. Mrs. Grant seems genuinely fond of Maisie. It's an act, Thomas said harshly. Everything the Grants do has purpose. Even giving a child a hair ribbon. Thomas glanced at the blue satin in Maisie's hand, and his expression softened fractionally. Especially that. They're trying to buy her affection, same as they want to buy my land. Not everything has ulterior motives, Mr. Callahan. He met her gaze directly. In my experience, Miss Hart, most things do. The ride home passed in strained silence, broken only by Maisie's occasional comments about sights along the road. Barbara sensed Thomas retreating further into himself, his brief moments of openness vanishing beneath renewed suspicion. As they approached the ranch, a plume of smoke on the horizon shattered the tension. Fire! Thomas shouted, urging the horses to greater speed. They crested the final rise to find the Callahan barn engulfed in flames. Orange tongues licked at wooden beams while black smoke billowed skyward. The horses in the corral whinnied in terror, pressing against the farthest fence. Thomas leapt from the still-moving wagon, racing toward the inferno. The stock! He yelled. Get them out! Barbara grabbed the reins, bringing the team to a halt. Maisie, stay in the wagon, she ordered, then jumped down to follow Thomas. Heat blasted her face as she approached the barn. Thomas had already disappeared inside, seeking animals trapped within. Barbara ran to the corral, flinging open the gate to release the panicked horses. They bolted for the safety of the open pasture. She turned back to the barn in time to see Thomas emerge leading two terrified draft horses. Soot blackened his face and his shirt sleeves smoldered where embers had landed. "Is anyone else inside?" Barbara shouted over the roar of the flames. "Scout!" Maisie's anguished cry came from behind them. The girl had disobeyed, leaving the wagon to race toward the burning structure. "My pony's still inside." Before either adult could react, Maisie darted toward the barn entrance. Thomas lunged for her, catching her around the waist. "No," he roared. "It's too dangerous." "But Scout!" Maisie sobbed, fighting against her father's grip. Thomas thrust his daughter into Barbara's arms. "Hold her," he commanded, then turned and plunged back into the inferno. Barbara clutched the struggling child heart pounding as seconds stretched into an eternity. The barn's roof began to collapse, sending showers of sparks skyward. "Please," she whispered, unsure if she was praying or simply pleading with the universe. "Please." Just as hope faded, Thomas emerged from the smoke leading Maisie's pinto pony. Both man and animal staggered clear of the building moments before the main beam gave way, sending the entire structure crashing inward with a deafening roar. Thomas fell to his knees, coughing violently. Scout nuzzled Maisie, who broke free from Barbara to throw her arms around her pony's neck, sobbing with relief. Barbara rushed to Thomas, helping him away from the heat and smoke. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, still fighting for breath. "Everyone accounted for." "Oh, yes, the horses are safe." She examined him quickly, noting singed hair and blistered hands, but no serious burns. "What happened? How did it start?" Thomas's expression hardened through his exhaustion. "Not accident," he managed between coughs. "Saw lantern shards. Someone deliberately." "Grant," Barbara whispered. Thomas nodded grimly, rising to his feet with effort. Message received. By nightfall, the barn was reduced to smoldering ruins. Thomas had worked tirelessly to ensure the fire wouldn't spread to other buildings while Barbara tended the horses and kept Maisie occupied. Now, with the immediate crisis past, they gathered in the kitchen to assess the damage. "Lost all my hay," Thomas said, his voice raspy from smoke. "Feed stores, most of the tack. Winter's coming and I've got nothing to see the stock through." Barbara dressed his burned hands with salve and clean bandages. "Could neighbors help? Surely others would lend assistance. Nearest neighbor's 5 miles, and Grant's made sure most folks keep their distance from me." He winced as she wrapped a particularly raw section. "This changes everything. Without that barn, I can't maintain the ranch through winter." "What will you do?" Barbara asked, securing the last bandage. Thomas stared at his wrapped hands. "Only option now is to sell. To Grant, since no one else will touch property with disputed boundaries. But that's exactly what he wants." "I know." Thomas's expression was bleak. "But I've got Maisie to think about. Can't let pride cost her security." Barbara felt a surge of indignation. "So you'll let Grant win after he cut your fences, stole your cattle, filed false charges, and now burned your barn?" "What would you have me do?" Thomas demanded. "Fight the entire county. Grant owns the bank, the businesses, even some of the law. I'm one man with a child to protect in winter approaching." "You're also a Union officer who survived Gettysburg," Barbara reminded him. "You didn't surrender then. Why now?" Thomas's eyes flashed. "That was different. Was it you fought for principles then? What about now?" "I fought for the Union, not principles," he corrected harshly, "and I learned that victory often costs more than defeat." Barbara sat back, studying him. "What happened between you and Grant? What's the real history there?" Thomas was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said Sharpsburg, Antietam Creek, bloodiest day of the war. His eyes grew distant with memory. "Grant led a Confederate cavalry unit. I commanded infantry. We met in a cornfield at dawn." Barbara listened transfixed as Thomas continued. "His men were surrounded, outnumbered. Standard procedure was no quarter for cavalry raiders behind lines. But Grant threw down his sword, surrendered properly." He swallowed hard. "I took them prisoner instead of executing them. My commanding officer disagreed with my decision. Said I was soft." "You showed mercy," Barbara interpreted. "I showed weakness according to military doctrine." Thomas flexed his bandaged hands. 3 months later, those same raiders escaped and killed 16 of our men in their sleep. The weight of his guilt hung palpable in the kitchen air. Grant never forgave me for capturing him, Thomas concluded. Says I robbed him of a glorious death, and I never forgave myself for the men who died later because of my choice. Barbara struggled to comprehend the complex moral tangle. So this land dispute is really about old war wounds? For Grant, perhaps. For me, it's about Mary and Maisie. Thomas rose painfully. I need to check on the stock. They're spooked. After he'd gone, Barbara sat alone in the kitchen, piecing together the fragments of Thomas Callahan's story. A Union officer who showed mercy to Confederate enemies. A Northern man who married a Southern belle. A widower raising a daughter in hostile territory haunted by wartime decisions that still cast shadows years later. And now, after fighting so long to maintain his independence, he faced surrender to his oldest enemy. Barbara found herself unexpectedly moved by his situation and increasingly determined that Maxwell Grant should not prevail. There had to be another solution, some way to survive, until the false charges could be disproven and the true arsonist identified. She was still contemplating possibilities when Thomas returned, looking utterly spent. Without a word, he collapsed into a chair. Maisie's asleep, Barbara told him. I read to her until she drifted off. He nodded gratefully. Thank you. I've been thinking, she ventured, about your situation. Thomas sighed. There's nothing to be done. Grant's won this round. Not necessarily. Barbara leaned forward. I have some savings. Not much, but enough to purchase emergency supplies. Feed for the stock, basic materials to build a shelter before winter. He stiffened. I told you before I won't take your money. Consider it an investment then, in Maisie's future. She met his gaze steadily. I believe in what you're fighting for, Mr. Callahan. A home for your daughter. Mary's legacy. Why would you do this? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. You barely know us. You're leaving on the next train regardless. Barbara hesitated, uncertain herself of her motivations. Because it's right, she said finally. Grant shouldn't win through intimidation and violence. Thomas studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You're a remarkable woman, Miss Hart. The unexpected compliment warmed her. Not remarkable, just stubborn. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Stubbornness has its merits. He rubbed his temples, wearily. I'll consider your offer, but first we need to survive Monday's hearing. If I'm jailed, none of this matters. Then we'll focus on disproving Grant's accusations. Barbara decided. Sheriff Preston suggested finding witnesses who saw Grant's men elsewhere during the alleged confrontation. Town's divided, Thomas warned. Many won't speak against Grant. But some might, Barbara countered, especially if approached by someone less contentious than yourself. Thomas raised an eyebrow, meaning you wait from I have experience persuading reluctant witnesses. My work in Boston often involved convincing people to stand up against powerful interests. He considered this. It's risky. Grant won't appreciate interference. I'm already interfering by staying here, Barbara pointed out. Besides, I'll be leaving soon. What can he do to me? Thomas's expression darkened. More than you might imagine. Grant doesn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. Never did. Then we'll be cautious, she conceded. But we must try something, for Maisie's sake. At the mention of his daughter, Thomas's resolve visibly strengthened. Very well. Tomorrow we return to town. Together. As Barbara prepared for bed that night, she reflected on how quickly her circumstances had changed. A week ago, she'd been stranded at Dustmere Station, humiliated and desperate. Now she stood allied with Thomas Callahan against the town's most powerful man defending a home and child that weren't hers. The rational part of her mind questioned this involvement. She would leave on the next train regardless, returning to the world of classrooms and civilization. This frontier drama wasn't her fight, yet something deeper compelled her participation. Perhaps it was the injustice of Grant's machinations, or Maisie's vulnerable resilience, or even Thomas himself, a complex man trying to reconcile warrior and father past and present in a hostile land. Whatever the reason, Barbara realized she was committed now. For the next week at least, her fate was entwined with the Callahans. And despite the danger, despite the certainty of eventual departure, she found herself oddly unwilling to have it any other way. The thought followed her into sleep, along with the lingering image of Thomas Callahan rushing into flames to save his daughter's pony, a man capable of both stubborn pride and selfless courage, a puzzle she was increasingly determined to solve. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp. Barbara woke to the sound of hammering, a steady, determined rhythm that drew her to the window. Below, Thomas worked on a temporary shelter for the horses, his movements methodical despite his bandaged hands. Nearby, Maisie carefully sorted salvaged tack, her small face set in concentration. The sight of father and daughter laboring together stirred something in Barbara. They possessed a quiet resilience that defied their circumstances. Neither complained, neither surrendered to self-pity. They simply did what needed doing. She dressed quickly and joined them, accepting a mug of coffee Thomas had prepared over an outdoor fire. "You're up early," she observed. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Thinking about tomorrow's hearing." Barbara surveyed his progress. "The shelter's coming along well. Won't replace the barn, but it'll keep the worst weather off them." He drove another nail with unnecessary force. "Maisie, bring those leather straps over." The girl hurried to comply, eager to help. Barbara noticed she wore the blue ribbon Mrs. Grant had given her, carefully tied around one of her braids Barbara had persuaded her to try the previous evening. "You look very pretty today," Barbara told her. Maisie touched the ribbon self-consciously. "Daddy said I could wear it, just today." Thomas didn't look up from his work. "We're returning to town after breakfast. Need to present our best appearance." Barbara understood his strategy. The court would see not a dangerous ruffian, but a respectable family, a father, a teacher, and a well-behaved child. Appearances mattered in frontier justice. After a hasty breakfast, they dressed in their finest clothes. Thomas wore his one good suit, somewhat outdated, but well-maintained, with a clean-shaven face and trimmed hair. Barbara donned her navy traveling dress, the least worn of her limited wardrobe. Maisie, after considerable negotiation, agreed to wear her single dress, freshly washed and pressed. "Remember," Thomas instructed as they traveled toward town, "we're seeking witnesses who saw Grant's men elsewhere during the alleged confrontation. Be discreet. Grant has eyes everywhere." Barbara nodded. "I'll start at the Mercantile. Women talk while shopping. Maisie can come with me." "I'll check the livery and saloon," Thomas decided. "Meet back at Preston's office by noon." Dustmere bustled with Sunday activity, churchgoers in their finest attire, merchants preparing for the week ahead, and cowboys enjoying their day off. Barbara attracted curious glances as she and Maisie made their way toward the Mercantile, her association with Thomas Callahan now common knowledge. Inside the store, several women browsed the dry goods. Ellie Jenkins greeted them with practiced cheerfulness. "Miss Hart, Maisie, what a transformation. Almost didn't recognize this young lady in a proper dress." Maisie fidgeted uncomfortably, but managed a polite response. "Good morning, Miss Ellie. We need a few items for Maisie's lessons," Barbara explained, guiding the conversation toward their purpose. "Things have been rather exciting at the Callahan Ranch lately." Ellie's eyes gleamed with interest. "So I've heard. That barn fire's the talk of the town." "A terrible accident," Barbara said carefully, watching for reactions. "Fortunately, Mr. Callahan was able to save the animals." A woman examining fabric nearby sniffed audibly. "Accident, that's not what I heard." Barbara turned with calculated surprise. "Oh, what have you heard, Mrs. Whitfield? Sarah Whitfield." The woman lowered her voice conspiratorially. "My husband works at the Silver Dollar. Says Grant's men were bragging about teaching Callahan a lesson Friday night. Drank heavily, left with a lantern and rope." Barbara's pulse quickened. "How interesting. And this was—" "Friday afternoon, just after the storm broke." Mrs. Whitfield glanced around nervously. "Not that I'm one to spread gossip." "Of course not," Barbara assured her. "Mr. Callahan would be grateful for your discretion, and perhaps your husband's testimony if necessary." The woman paled. "Oh, I couldn't possibly. Mr. Grant would—" "Would what exactly?" Barbara asked quietly. "Punish honest citizens for telling the truth." Mrs. Whitfield didn't answer, but her expression spoke volumes. Fear of Grant ran deep in Dustmere. Ellie Jenkins leaned across the counter. "You are playing a dangerous game, Miss Hart. Grant doesn't forgive those who cross him." "Neither does justice," Barbara countered, selecting pencils and paper. "Will you wrap these, please? Maisie and I have other errands." As they left the Mercantile, Barbara felt eyes following them. She'd made an impression and possibly an enemy, but she'd also gained valuable information. Their next stop was the church where services had just concluded. Barbara spotted the minister, a thin man with kind eyes, speaking with the parishioners on the steps. Reverend Adams, she approached politely. I'm Barbara Hart, temporarily teaching at the Callahan Ranch. The minister smiled warmly. Miss Hart, Sheriff Preston mentioned you. A godsend for young Maisie, I'm sure. He knelt to the girl's level. Hello there, child. Wonderful to see you in God's house. Maisie regarded him solemnly. Daddy says God is everywhere, not just in buildings. Reverend Adams chuckled. Your father is quite right. How is Thomas? I've invited him to services many times without success. He's well, though concerned about tomorrow's hearing, Barbara replied. Actually, I hoped you might help us. Mr. Callahan has been accused of threatening Grant's men Friday noon. We're seeking witnesses who might have seen those men elsewhere at that time. The minister's expression grew thoughtful. As it happens, I was at the Silver Dollar Friday on ministerial business, he added hastily, trying to encourage the owner to close during Sunday services. I recall seeing Mr. Decker and Mr. Waite, Grant's foreman, playing cards around midday. They seemed quite settled in. Barbara could hardly believe their luck. Would you be willing to testify to that, Reverend? I abhor false witness, Miss Hart. If asked under oath, I would certainly speak truth. He lowered his voice. Between us, many in Dustmere are growing weary of Grant's methods. His wealth brings prosperity, but at considerable moral cost. Thank you, Reverend, Barbara said earnestly. Your integrity may save an innocent man from injustice. As they continued through town, Barbara's optimism grew. The minister's testimony alone might disprove Grant's accusations. If Thomas found additional witnesses, their case would strengthen further. They were passing the newspaper office when Barbara noticed a gathering crowd. At its center stood Maxwell Grant, himself resplendent in a tailored suit, addressing the editor of the Dustmere Chronicle. Make certain that announcement appears prominently, Grant was saying. The Railroad Commission makes its final decision next month. Dustmere's future depends on proper representation of our interests. Barbara tried to hurry past unnoticed, but Grant's sharp eyes caught them. Miss Hart, he called, his voice carrying easily. A moment, if you please. Trapped Barbara faced him with forced composure. Mr. Grant, good morning. Grant approached with the confidence of absolute authority, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Miss Hart, Miss Callahan, how lovely to see you both in town. His gaze lingered on Maisie's ribbon. I see Eleanor's gift was well received. Mrs. Grant was most generous, Barbara acknowledged stiffly. My wife has a soft spot for children. Grant smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. She particularly admires young Maisie here. Says the child deserves better opportunities than a remote ranch can provide. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Barbara drew Maisie closer. Mr. Callahan provides admirably for his daughter. Of course, though recent events must strain his resources considerably. Grant's tone oozed false concern. A barn fire, legal troubles, winter approaching, difficult circumstances for a single father. Mr. Callahan is resilient, Barbara replied evenly, and not without friends. Grant's smile tightened. Friends are transient, Miss Hart. As I understand it, you yourself will depart on next week's train. He bent slightly, addressing Maisie directly. When Miss Hart leaves, you're always welcome at our home, child. Eleanor would love your company. We have a fine piano she could teach you to play. Maisie pressed against Barbara's side, but said nothing. Grant straightened his manner, shifting to business. My offer for the Callahan property stands at $3,000, a generous sum given its encumbrances. Please convey that to Thomas. He tipped his hat again. Good day, ladies. I look forward to tomorrow's proceedings. As he walked away, Barbara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter left her shaken, not for herself, but for what it revealed about Grant's intentions. He didn't just want the land, he wanted complete victory over Thomas Callahan, even perhaps influence over Maisie. I don't like him, Maisie whispered. He smiles, but his eyes are cold. Trust those instincts, Barbara advised, guiding her toward the sheriff's office. Some people hide their true nature behind pleasant words. Inside Preston's office, they found Thomas and the sheriff deep in conversation. Both men looked up as they entered. Any luck? Thomas asked immediately. Barbara nodded. Mrs. Whitfield's husband heard Grant's men bragging about setting the fire, and Reverend Adams saw them playing cards in town during the time they claimed to be threatened by you. Preston's weathered face broke into a satisfied smile. That's solid testimony. The Reverend's word carries weight even against Grant. We had an encounter with Grant just now, Barbara continued describing the exchange. He specifically mentioned the hearing and reiterated his offer for the ranch. Thomas's jaw tightened. Using legal intimidation to drive down my price. Classic Grant tactic. There's more, Preston interjected. While you were gathering witnesses, I received this. He handed Thomas a telegram. From Army Records in Washington. Thomas read the paper, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. This can't be right. What is it? Barbara asked. According to official records, Maxwell Grant died at Antietam, Preston explained. The man running Dustmere is either a ghost or an imposter. Barbara struggled to comprehend the implications. But how? Identity theft, Thomas said grimly. While uncommon after battles. Bodies unidentifiable, records chaotic. Someone could claim to be an officer, take his papers, his name. The real question, Preston added, is who exactly we're dealing with. Thomas stared at the telegram. I never knew Grant before the war. Identified him by uniform and insignia during battle, then by name when he surrendered. His expression hardened. But if he's an imposter, that means every transaction, every land deal, every loan potentially fraudulent. Preston finished, including his claim on your property. The revelation stunned Barbara. Can you arrest him? Not without more evidence, Preston cautioned. This telegram alone proves nothing except a records discrepancy. We need his real identity proof of deliberate fraud. Thomas folded the telegram carefully. This changes our strategy for tomorrow. Instead of just defending against his accusation, we challenge his very standing to bring charges. Risky, Preston warned. If he is an imposter, he's maintained the charade for years. He won't surrender easily. Neither will I, Thomas stated, a new determination in his voice. Maisie, Miss Hart, we're going home. We have preparations to make. As they left the sheriff's office, Barbara sensed a fundamental shift in their situation. What had begun as a simple land dispute now involved potential criminal conspiracy at the highest levels of Dustmere society. The stakes had risen dramatically, and so had the danger. The journey back to the ranch passed in tense discussion. Thomas and Barbara reviewed their strategy for the hearing while Maisie dozed between them, exhausted by the day's events. Grant, or whoever he is, will be prepared, Thomas cautioned. He's maintained this deception too long to be caught easily. But the telegram creates reasonable doubt, Barbara argued, enough to delay proceedings while Preston investigates further. Perhaps. Thomas guided the wagon around a deep rut, but if Grant realizes we're challenging his identity, he might abandon legal pretenses entirely. You think he'd resort to violence in town? He burned my barn to send a message, Thomas reminded her. Men like that don't recognize boundaries. Barbara glanced at Maisie's sleeping form. Should she attend tomorrow if there's danger? She stays with us, Thomas said firmly. I won't leave her alone at the ranch, and there's no one in town I trust enough. They lapsed into silence, each contemplating the morning's confrontation. As the wagon crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, Thomas suddenly pulled the team to a halt. Something's wrong, he said sharply. Barbara followed his gaze. Below, several horses were tethered outside the house. Men moved around the property with purposeful strides. Grant's men, Thomas growled, reaching for the rifle beneath the seat, searching for something. The gold map, Barbara realized. While we were in town gathering evidence, he sent men to find it. Thomas checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. I'll approach from the south pasture. You take Maisie and circle behind the creek bed. If anything happens to me, get her to Preston. I won't leave you to face them alone, Barbara protested. This isn't a debate. Thomas's voice was steel. Maisie's safety comes first, always. The child stirred, awakened by their tense voices. Daddy, what's happening? Just a change of plans, sweetheart, he soothed, helping her down from the wagon. You're going with Miss Hart for a little adventure. Maisie, perceptive as always, sensed the underlying tension. Bad men at our house. Thomas knelt to her level. Some uninvited guests. I'm going to ask them to leave. He hugged her fiercely. Remember what I taught you about being brave. Brave isn't not being scared, she recited. Brave is doing what's right, even when you are scared. That's my girl. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then turned to Barbara. The creek bed leads to a stand of cottonwoods. Wait there. If you hear gunfire, just keep her safe. Barbara saw the torment in his eyes, a father forced to choose between defending his home and protecting his child. "We'll be careful," she promised. "But please, Thomas, don't confront them directly. Observe only, then we'll fetch Preston." He nodded reluctantly. 1 hour. "If I don't join you by then, get to town." As Thomas disappeared into the gathering dusk, Barbara led Maisie toward the creek. The girl followed without complaint, understanding instinctively the need for quiet. They crept along the creek bed, using its banks for cover. From this vantage, Barbara could see 4 men ransacking the house, pulling out drawers, overturning furniture, searching with destructive thoroughness. "They're looking for Mama's special paper," Maisie whispered. Barbara nodded. "Your father will stop them." "No, he won't," Maisie said with strange certainty. "'Cause I have it." Barbara stared at the child in shock. "You have the map," Maisie nodded solemnly. "Daddy showed me where he hid it. Said if bad men ever came, I should take it and run to the special place." From inside her dress, she withdrew a folded parchment sealed with wax. "See, I got it yesterday when you were cooking, just in case." Barbara was momentarily speechless. The object of Grant's obsession, the reason for all their troubles, rested in this child's small hands. "You're very brave and clever," she finally managed. "Your father will be proud." "Are we going to the special place now?" Maisie asked. "First, we need to warn your father that you have the map. Otherwise, he might put himself in danger trying to protect something that's already safe." They reached the cottonwood grove and took shelter beneath its spreading branches. Darkness was falling rapidly, the temperature dropping with the sun. Barbara wrapped her shawl around Maisie, wishing she'd thought to bring warmer clothing. An hour passed with excruciating slowness. No gunshots disturbed the evening, but neither did Thomas appear. Barbara wrestled with indecision: remain as instructed or seek help. Her deliberation ended abruptly at the sound of approaching footsteps. She pulled Maisie deeper into the shadows, heart pounding. "Barbara," Thomas's voice came softly. "Maisie." They emerged from hiding to find him silhouetted against the darkening sky. His clothing was torn and dirty, his expression grim. "They've gone," he reported. "Tore the place apart, but left when they couldn't find what they wanted." He knelt before Maisie. "Are you all right, little one?" In answer, Maisie solemnly presented the folded parchment. "I remember Daddy, just like you taught me." Thomas stared at the map in disbelief, then gathered his daughter into a fierce embrace. "My brilliant, brave girl." Over Maisie's head, his eyes met Barbara's, filled with mingled relief and worry. "They'll be back, with Grant himself most likely." "Then we won't be here," Barbara decided. "We'll go to town tonight, directly to Preston. With the map and the telegram, we have enough to force an investigation." Thomas nodded reluctantly. "We can't return to the house. They might have left watchers." "What about closed food?" Barbara asked practically. "I keep emergency supplies in the line shack about a mile east." Thomas lifted Maisie into his arms. "We'll collect what we need, then take the back trail to town." As they made their way through deepening darkness, Barbara reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 1 week. From abandoned bride to fugitive, she'd crossed boundaries she'd never imagined. Yet somehow it felt right standing beside Thomas and Maisie, against injustice, protecting not just a piece of land, but a family's legacy. The line shack proved to be a simple one-room structure used during cattle roundups. Thomas quickly gathered essentials, blankets, jerky canteens of water, and a change of clothes for Maisie. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it'll see us to town." Barbara accepted a blanket, gratefully wrapping it around her shoulders. "How long will the journey take?" 4 hours by the back trails. We'll reach Dustmere before dawn." As Thomas prepared their meager provisions, Barbara settled Maisie on a rough bunk. The child was exhausted but fighting sleep, her eyes tracking her father's movements anxiously. "Everything will be all right," Barbara assured her, smoothing back her hair. "Promise?" Maisie asked sleepily. The simple question caught Barbara off guard. Could she promise such a thing? Tomorrow's hearing might end in Thomas's arrest. Grant might prevail through legal maneuvering or outright corruption. The future held no certainties. Yet looking at this brave child, Barbara found she couldn't offer less than complete reassurance. "I promise," she said firmly. "Your father and I will keep you safe." Maisie's eyes drifted closed. "Like a real family," she murmured before sleep claimed her. The innocent observation struck Barbara with unexpected force. In just days, she'd developed attachments she'd never intended to this child, to this place, to Thomas Callahan himself. Yet her train ticket waited. Her Eastern life beckoned. This interlude, however intense, remained temporary. Thomas approached, offering a cup of coffee boiled over the small stove. "She's asleep." Barbara nodded, accepting the steaming mug. "She's remarkably resilient, like her mother." Thomas sat beside her on a rough bench. "Mary would have approved of you, I think. Your spirit, your determination." The comparison surprised her. "You don't speak of Mary often." "It's been easier these past days," he admitted. "Before you came, her absence was overwhelming. The silence in the house, the tasks left undone. Maisie growing up without a mother's guidance." He stared into his coffee. "You've brought life back into our home, Barbara, even temporarily." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it, combined with his raw honesty, created a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. "I've learned more from you and Maisie than you realize," she said softly. "About resilience, about fighting for what matters." Thomas met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. For a breathless moment, Barbara thought he might reach for her hand or speak words that would irrevocably change their relationship. Instead, he cleared his throat and rose. "We should rest while we can. Dawn comes early." The moment passed, leaving Barbara with confusing emotions. Relief mingled with disappointment, propriety with longing. She'd known Thomas Callahan barely a week, yet she felt connected to him in ways she couldn't articulate. As she settled beside Maisie on the narrow bunk, Barbara tried to focus on tomorrow's challenges rather than the unsettling awareness of Thomas sleeping just feet away. Tomorrow would determine all their fates: Thomas's freedom, Maisie's security, the ranch's future, and her own path forward, which suddenly seemed less clear than it had just days ago. They reached Dustmere as first light painted the eastern sky. The town slumbered, only the occasional lamplight suggesting early risers. Thomas led them directly to the sheriff's office, where Preston was already preparing for the day's proceedings. The sheriff's eyebrows rose at their disheveled appearance. "What happened?" Thomas quickly explained the invasion of his property. "Grant's men searched the house while we were in town, looking for this." He produced the map, now safely stored in an oilskin pouch. "Mary's inheritance. The reason Grant wants my land." Preston examined the document carefully. Genuine gold claim by the looks of it, registered properly with the territorial office. He glanced up sharply. "Does Grant know you have this?" "Not yet," Thomas replied. "But he knows we suspect his identity fraud. The timing of the search wasn't coincidental." "You think there's a leak?" Thomas shrugged. "Someone in town heard our discussions yesterday. Grant has many ears." Preston considered this. "Judge Harmon's due at 9. Until then, you should lay low. I've got a back room where Maisie can rest." He hesitated. "But there's something you should know. Grant arrived last night with 2 hired guns from Cheyenne. Professional troublemakers." Barbara felt a chill. "He's preparing for resistance. Smart money says he'll try to control the courtroom." Preston agreed. "Either through intimidation or by having Harmon in his pocket." Thomas's expression hardened. "Then we need to change venues. Take this beyond Dustmere to the federal marshal in Laramie." "That would require postponing today's hearing," Preston cautioned. "Harmon won't grant that easily, unless we give him no choice." Thomas paced the small office. "If Grant's identity fraud becomes the central issue, Harmon must recuse himself. The case would transfer to territorial court." Preston nodded slowly. "It could work, but Grant won't let you leave town if he suspects your plan." "Then we need a diversion," Barbara suggested. "Something to occupy Grant while you secure the judge's cooperation." The men looked at her with surprise. Thomas recovered first. "What did you have in mind?" "A meeting with Eleanor Grant," Barbara said decisively. "She invited me for tea. If I accept bringing Maisie along, it would give you freedom to maneuver without endangering her." Thomas immediately objected. "Absolutely not. I won't have you and Maisie in that house." "Eleanor Grant has shown genuine concern for Maisie," Barbara countered. "I believe she'd protect a child regardless of her husband's schemes. And Grant wouldn't harm us under his own roof. It would destroy his carefully cultivated respectability." Preston stroked his chin thoughtfully. "She might be right, Thomas. Eleanor Grant is well regarded in town. Charitable. Decent. Some wonder how she ended up with a man like Grant. It's too risky, Thomas insisted. Less risky than having Maisie present if violence erupts at the hearing, Barbara argued. She's already witnessed one confrontation at your ranch. Would you expose her to another? Thomas fell silent, clearly torn between keeping his daughter close and protecting her from potential danger. I'll request a private tea with Mrs. Grant, Barbara continued. Women's conversation only. Grant himself likely won't even be present. He'll be preparing for the hearing. And if something goes wrong, Thomas demanded, if Grant returns unexpectedly, then I'll use my considerable experience handling difficult men, Barbara replied with quiet confidence. I taught in Boston's worst neighborhoods, Mr. Callahan. I'm not helpless. Thomas studied her, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he turned to Maisie, who had been listening silently from a corner chair. What do you think, little one? Would you feel safe with Miss Hart at the Grant's house, just for a short visit? Maisie considered the question with surprising seriousness. Mrs. Grant is nice, she said finally, and Miss Barbara keeps promises. She promised we'd be safe. The simple trust in her voice settled the matter. Thomas nodded reluctantly. Very well, but at the first sign of trouble, we leave immediately, Barbara assured him. I'll invent any excuse necessary. Preston drafted a note to Eleanor Grant requesting a morning tea engagement to discuss mutual concerns regarding Maisie's education. A deputy delivered it, returning shortly with an enthusiastic acceptance. 10 o'clock at the Grant residence, Preston reported. Mrs. Grant is delighted by the opportunity for female companionship. Barbara had time only for minimal freshening, washing her face and hands, smoothing her travel-wrinkled dress, and arranging her hair as best she could. Maisie received similar attention with her blue ribbon carefully retied in her braids. Remember, Thomas instructed as they prepared to leave. This is simply a social call. Reveal nothing about our suspicions or the map. If Grant himself appears, make your excuses and leave immediately. Barbara nodded. We'll be fine. Focus on securing the judge's cooperation. Thomas hesitated, then bent to embrace Maisie tightly. Be good for Miss Hart. I will, Daddy. He straightened, meeting Barbara's gaze with naked concern. Take care of her. And yourself. Always, Barbara promised. The intensity of his regard stirred something within her, a recognition of deepening bonds that transcended their brief acquaintance. Preston offered to escort them to the Grant mansion, but Barbara declined. Better we appear as ordinary social callers. Your presence might raise suspicions. As they walked through awakening Dustmere, Barbara maintained outward calm while inwardly rehearsing contingencies. The Grant residence stood apart from town on a small hill, a two-story structure of imposing design surrounded by manicured gardens. Everything about it proclaimed wealth and permanence. A servant admitted them to an elegant foyer where Eleanor Grant waited to greet them personally. She wore a morning dress of pale blue silk, her hair arranged in fashionable curls. Miss Hart, Maisie, how delightful. Her smile seemed genuinely warm as she bent to the child's level. My dear, you look so pretty with your hair braided. The ribbon is perfect. Maisie managed a shy smile. Thank you for giving it to me, Mrs. Grant. Please call me Miss Ellie. All my young friends do. She straightened, addressing Barbara. I've arranged tea in the solarium. It catches the morning light beautifully. As they followed their hostess through the mansion, Barbara noted signs of cultured taste, fine art on the walls, quality furnishings, fresh flowers in crystal vases. Everything bespoke refined sensibilities at odds with Maxwell Grant's ruthless reputation. The solarium proved to be a glass-enclosed room filled with exotic plants in comfortable wicker furniture. A table had been set with delicate china and silver, an array of small cakes and sandwiches awaiting them. I wasn't certain what Maisie might enjoy, Eleanor explained, so I requested a variety. It's lovely, Barbara assured her. You're very kind to receive us on such short notice. Eleanor waved away the thanks. Female companionship is rare in Dustmere. Educated conversation rarer still. She poured tea into bone china cups. I understand you're a teacher from Boston. How refreshing to meet someone with cultural background. As they sipped tea, the conversation remained pleasantly general. Boston society, music, literature. Eleanor revealed herself to be surprisingly well-read, with opinions on everything from Dickens to Darwin. Maisie listened wide-eyed, occasionally contributing observations that made both women smile. Eventually, Eleanor turned the discussion to more personal matters. Thomas Callahan is fortunate to have secured your services even temporarily. Maisie clearly thrives under your guidance. Barbara acknowledged the compliment. She's a remarkable child, intelligent, resilient. Like her mother, Eleanor noted. I knew Mary slightly before her marriage. She possessed similar qualities. This revelation surprised Barbara. You knew Mrs. Callahan? Eleanor nodded, her expression growing distant. Savannah society before the war changed everything. Mary Beaumont was considered a great beauty with exceptional musical talent. She glanced toward the main house. My husband's business frequently brought us south. We attended several events where Mary performed. Daddy says Mama played like an angel, Maisie interjected. Indeed she did, child. Eleanor's smile held sadness. When she married your father, a Union officer no less, it scandalized Savannah. But Mary always followed her heart, even against convention. Barbara processed this information carefully. It must have been difficult settling in Wyoming after such a genteel upbringing. Mary was stronger than she appeared, Eleanor replied, as I suspect you are Miss Hart. Her gaze sharpened, which leads me to wonder about the true purpose of this visit. Thomas Callahan faces serious charges today. Yet here you sit calmly drinking tea with his opponent's wife. The directness caught Barbara off guard. She set down her cup, abandoning pretense. You're very perceptive, Mrs. Grant. Eleanor, please. She glanced at Maisie, who was examining a flowering plant nearby. Lowering her voice, she continued, I'm not blind to my husband's methods, Miss Hart, nor am I entirely supportive of them. Barbara studied the elegant woman before her reassessing. May I speak frankly? I would prefer it. Your husband's pursuit of the Callahan property has escalated dangerously. A barn burned, a home invaded, a child endangered. Barbara held Eleanor's gaze steadily. Whatever business dispute exists between the men, surely we can agree Maisie's welfare transcends it. Eleanor's composed facade cracked slightly. I've said as much to Max, repeatedly. She glanced toward Maisie again. I never had children. A personal sorrow. Perhaps that's why I feel protective toward her. Then help us, Barbara urged quietly. Persuade your husband to end this vendetta. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. You don't know Max. Once fixed on a goal, he's immovable. She hesitated, then added more softly, especially regarding Thomas Callahan. That animosity runs deeper than land or gold. Because of the war, a shadow crossed Eleanor's refined features. The war changed many men. Some, like your Mr. Callahan, carry visible scars. Others bury their wounds deeper, where they fester. Before Barbara could pursue this revealing statement, the solarium door opened. Maxwell Grant stood framed in the doorway, his imposing figure darkening the bright room. Eleanor, he drawled, you didn't mention we had guests. Eleanor Grant rose gracefully, her composed exterior betraying only a flicker of surprise at her husband's appearance. Maxwell, dear, Miss Hart brought young Maisie for a morning visit. We've been discussing her education. Grant's calculating gaze swept over Barbara and Maisie, lingering on the child with unsettling interest. Education? Of course. His tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. Rather early for social calls, isn't it? The hearing is at 9, Barbara replied evenly. I wanted to ensure Maisie had a safe, comfortable place during the proceedings. How considerate. Grant stepped fully into the solarium, his imposing figure seeming to shrink the bright space. Inconvenient. Thomas Callahan sends his daughter to my home while he prepares his defense. Barbara maintained her composure. Mr. Callahan had no objection to our visit. Your wife has shown genuine kindness to Maisie. Indeed she has. Grant approached the tea table, resting his hands on the back of an empty chair. Eleanor has always been fond of children. A pity we couldn't have our own. The personal revelation, delivered with calculated casualness, created an uncomfortable silence. Eleanor's face betrayed nothing but her hands tightened slightly around her teacup. Perhaps, Grant continued, addressing Maisie directly, you'd like to see our library while the adults talk. We have illustrated books from Europe, pictures of far-off places and magnificent creatures. Maisie glanced uncertainly at Barbara, who forced a reassuring smile despite her instinctive alarm. That sounds lovely, but we shouldn't impose further on Mrs. Grant's hospitality. The hearing will begin soon. Nonsense, Grant insisted. I've just come from Judge Harmon. The proceedings are delayed until 10:30, something about missing documentation. His eyes glinted with knowing amusement. We have ample time for a proper visit. Barbara realized with dismay that Thomas's plan to postpone the hearing had succeeded, but had inadvertently trapped her and Maisie at the Grant residence longer than intended. Eleanor intervened smoothly. Maisie, would you like to see our piano? It's a Steinway concert grand, quite similar to what your mother played. The girl's eyes widened with interest. Yes, please. Excellent. Eleanor rose, extending her hand to Maisie. We'll leave your father and Miss Hart to their business discussion. Grant's eyebrow arched. Business discussion. Educational funding, Eleanor explained with practiced ease. Miss Hart has innovative ideas for expanding learning opportunities in Dustmere. She guided Maisie toward the door. We won't be long. After they'd gone, Grant settled into the chair opposite Barbara, helping himself to tea with deliberate slowness. You're an intriguing woman, Miss Hart, he finally said. Abandoned at a train station, yet within days you've integrated yourself into Thomas Callahan's household and legal affairs. He stirred sugar into his cup, almost as if planned. Barbara met his gaze directly. Nothing was planned, Mr. Grant. Circumstances brought me to the Callahan Ranch temporarily. My train departs next week. Circumstances, Grant repeated thoughtfully. Curious how often they benefit Thomas Callahan. A teacher appears precisely when his daughter needs education. A witness materializes just as he faces legal troubles. He sipped his tea. One might suspect arrangement rather than coincidence. One might suspect many things without evidence, Barbara countered, including a man's true identity. The cup froze halfway to Grant's lips. His eyes, previously calculating, hardened to flint. Careful, Miss Hart. Unfounded accusations can be dangerous. So can arson and harassment, she replied, abandoning pretense. Mr. Callahan merely wants to live peacefully on his land with his daughter. Your persistence in targeting him seems excessive for a simple business matter. Grant set down his cup with controlled precision. You understand nothing of business, Miss Hart, or of Thomas Callahan. His voice lowered. Did he tell you what happened at Antietam, the full story? He mentioned taking Confederate prisoners rather than executing them. An act of mercy. Grant's laugh held no humor. Mercy, is that what he calls it? He leaned forward. Let me enlighten you about your paragon of virtue. Before the battle, Thomas Callahan was tasked with reconnoitering enemy positions. He encountered a small Confederate patrol, including myself, and had the opportunity to capture valuable intelligence. Instead, he hesitated. Barbara maintained her neutral expression, though her pulse quickened. War creates impossible situations. Indeed, Grant agreed coldly. His hesitation allowed my men to destroy crucial documents. When Union forces attacked the next day, they lacked vital information about Confederate artillery positions. 800 men died because Thomas Callahan couldn't follow simple orders. The accusation hung in the air between them. Barbara searched Grant's face, seeing not just anger, but something deeper, a festering resentment that transcended normal wartime animosity. After the battle, Grant continued, Callahan captured what remained of my unit. Standard procedure called for immediate execution of saboteurs. Instead, he took prisoners not from mercy, Miss Hart, but to avoid responsibility for his previous failure. Prisoners could be interrogated, potentially recovering lost intelligence. That seems pragmatic rather than dishonorable, Barbara observed carefully. Grant's eyes narrowed. Pragmatic, perhaps, but his commanding officer disagreed. Colonel James Harrington believed Callahan's errors had cost hundreds of lives. He wanted examples made. His voice grew distant with memory. They argued bitterly while we prisoners watched. Harrington eventually relented, but he stripped Callahan of his command. Barbara processed this new information, wondering how much was truth and how much distortion. Even if accurate, Mr. Grant, these events occurred over a decade ago. Why pursue this vendetta now? Because justice was never served, Grant replied with sudden vehemence. Callahan returned home a hero while better men lay buried in shallow graves. He married a Southern belle, one of our own, and claimed her inheritance as spoils of war. His composure slipped, revealing raw hatred. Some debts cannot be settled with money, Miss Hart. Some require more personal compensation. A chill ran through Barbara at his tone. This wasn't merely about land or gold. Grant sought Thomas Callahan's complete destruction as recompense for perceived wartime injustice. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Grant?" she asked directly. He leaned back, his control returning. "Everything he values, his land, his reputation, his daughter's future." He smiled thinly. "I'll raise Maisie as my own, give her advantages Callahan never could. Education, society, position. Eleanor would dote on her." The calculated cruelty of his plan stunned Barbara. "You can't seriously believe a court would grant you custody of his child." "Courts favor stability and prosperity over sentiment, Miss Hart. A disgraced former soldier with financial troubles versus the region's most prominent businessman." Grant shrugged, particularly when evidence emerges of Callahan's unfitness as a parent. "What evidence?" Barbara demanded. "Allowing his daughter to live in primitive conditions, exposing her to danger through his reckless feuds, permitting improper living arrangements with an unmarried woman." Grant's smile widened. "The list grows daily." Barbara struggled to maintain her composure. "These are fabrications." "They're interpretations," Grant corrected, "and interpretations become facts when delivered by respected witnesses." He glanced at the clock on the mantel. "Speaking of witnesses, I should prepare for the hearing. Judge Harmon appreciates punctuality." He rose, adjusting his immaculate jacket. "A proposition, Miss Hart. You're an educated woman with evident capabilities. Your return east seems wasteful when opportunities exist here in Wyoming." His eyes assessed her coldly. "Dustmere needs qualified teachers. The position could be arranged comfortable accommodations, respectable salary, Eleanor's social patronage." Barbara stared at him, comprehending his real offer. "In exchange for testimony against Mr. Callahan." "Testimony aligned with observed facts," Grant clarified. "You've witnessed his volatile temper, his inadequate parenting, his financial desperation. Simply confirm these observations under oath." "And if I refuse," Grant's expression hardened, "then you return east as planned, assuming the train arrives safely. These mountain passes can be treacherous. Accidents occur." He paused significantly. "Some brides who came seeking husbands never reached their destinations. Their families received only vague reports of frontier mishaps." The threat, delivered with businesslike detachment, chilled Barbara to her core. Before she could respond, the door opened, admitting Eleanor and Maisie. "The piano is wonderful," Maisie exclaimed, her face animated with rare excitement. "Miss Ellie played Chopin just like Mama used to." Eleanor's serene expression revealed nothing of what might have transpired during their absence. "Maisie has natural musical aptitude. With proper instruction, she could become quite accomplished." Grant's demeanor transformed instantly, warmth replacing calculation as he addressed the child. "Perhaps you'll play for us someday, young lady. We'd be honored." Barbara rose, gathering her resolve. "We should prepare for the hearing. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Grant." "Of course." Eleanor escorted them toward the foyer, her husband following at a deliberate distance. "Please visit again, Maisie. The piano awaits whenever you wish to practice." As they reached the front door, Grant called out, "Miss Hart, consider my proposition carefully. Opportunities in Wyoming are rare for women of your circumstances." Barbara met his gaze with quiet defiance. "I always consider my choices carefully, Mr. Grant, as should you." Outside in the crisp morning air, Barbara finally allowed herself a shuddering breath. She took Maisie's hand and walked quickly down the hill toward town, fighting the urge to look back. "Did you like Miss Ellie's house?" Maisie asked innocently. Barbara forced a smile. "It's very grand, but I prefer your home." "Me too," Maisie agreed, "though the piano was nice." She looked up searchingly. "Did Mr. Grant say mean things when I was gone?" The perceptiveness of the question caught Barbara off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "You look scared," Maisie said simply, "like when the barn was burning." Barbara slowed her pace, considering how to respond. "Mr. Grant and I had a difficult conversation," she admitted, "about your father in the hearing." "Is Daddy in trouble?" "No more than before," Barbara assured her, hoping it was true. "We need to find him quickly, though. I have important information." They hurried through Dustmere's awakening streets toward the sheriff's office. The town hummed with unusual activity. Knots of people gathered on corners, Voices raised in speculation about the delayed hearing. News traveled fast in small communities. Sheriff Preston met them at his office door, relief evident in his weathered face. Thank goodness, Thomas was about to storm the Grant mansion himself. Inside, Thomas paced like a caged animal. He froze at their entrance, then crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering Maisie into his arms. Are you all right? He demanded, examining his daughter anxiously. I'm fine, Daddy, Maisie assured him. Miss Ellie has a piano like Mama's. She played Chopin. Thomas's eyes lifted to Barbara's face, reading her tension immediately. What happened? Barbara related her conversation with Grant, including his wartime accusations and threats regarding Maisie's custody. This isn't just about land or gold, she concluded. It's personal vengeance for perceived wartime injustice. Thomas's expression darkened. Grant's version is convenient revisionism. He omits that his patrol was executing escaped slaves when we encountered them. His crucial documents were orders for civilian reprisals. Preston let out a low whistle. That changes the complexion considerably. The truth rarely survives war intact, Thomas said bitterly. Each side reshapes it to justify their actions. He set Maisie down gently. But Grant's threats against my daughter cross every boundary. He's confident the court will favor him, Barbara warned. He implied Judge Harmon is sympathetic to his cause. Harmon served in the Confederate cavalry, Preston confirmed. Not under Grant directly, but there's history there. Thomas resumed pacing. Then we need leverage beyond the identity question, something that forces a venue change regardless of Harmon's inclinations. Barbara recalled Grant's oblique reference to brides who never reach their destinations. A chilling thought took shape. What if there were others like me, women lured to Dustmere by false promises who then disappeared? Preston frowned. You think Grant's behind the mail-order bride scheme? It fits his pattern, she reasoned. Create vulnerability, then exploit it. The women who didn't find employment or protection would be desperate, easy targets. For what purpose? Thomas asked. Barbara hesitated, glancing at Maisie. Perhaps we should discuss certain details privately. Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. He nodded to Preston, who knelt beside Maisie. Young lady, I've got some peppermint sticks in my desk. Would you like one while the adults talk boring business? After Maisie was settled in the adjacent room with candy and paper for drawing, Barbara lowered her voice. Grant threatened that accidents happen to eastbound travelers. He specifically mentioned brides who never reach their destinations. Preston's expression grew grave. There have been missing persons reports, women passing through Dustmere who never arrived at their next location. We assumed frontier dangers, whether illness, banditry, or deliberate elimination of witnesses, Thomas suggested darkly. If Grant's identity is fraudulent, anyone who might recognize him from before would be a threat. Barbara considered the implications. If we could connect Grant to these disappearances, it would supersede local jurisdiction. Federal marshals would intervene. That's a significant if, Preston cautioned. We need evidence, not speculation. Thomas rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Eleanor Grant might know something. Barbara, you mentioned she recognized Mary from Savannah Society. If she knew the real Maxwell Grant as well, she might realize her husband is an imposter, Barbara finished. But would she testify against him? There's clearly fear beneath her elegant exterior. Fear or complicity, Preston suggested. We can't assume her innocence. She's genuinely fond of Maisie, Barbara insisted, and there was tension between the Grants when he mentioned their childlessness. I sense resentment there. Thomas nodded decisively. We need to speak with Eleanor Grant privately, away from her husband's influence. The hearing provides our opportunity. Grant will be occupied in court. He expects me to attend as well, Barbara noted. My absence would raise suspicions. I'll go, Preston volunteered. Official inquiry about an unrelated matter. Nothing to connect it to today's proceedings. Thomas checked his pocket watch. The hearing convenes in 40 minutes. We need to move quickly. He turned to Barbara. Will you take Maisie to the schoolhouse? Miss Wilson, the teacher, is a friend. She'll keep her safe during the proceedings. Of course, Barbara agreed, though part of her wished to witness the courtroom confrontation. Once Maisie's settled, join us at the courthouse, Thomas added, as if reading her thoughts. Your testimony regarding Grant's threats may prove crucial. Preston collected his badge and gun. I'll speak with Eleanor Grant, then meet you at the courthouse. With luck, we'll have what we need before Harmon renders judgment. As the men prepared to leave, Thomas drew Barbara aside. Grant threatened you, he stated rather than asked. She nodded. Veiled implications about train accidents. Nothing direct. His expression hardened. When this is over, I'll escort you personally to the next station. Ensure your safe passage. The offer touched her unexpectedly. Thank you, though I hope it won't be necessary. As do I. Thomas hesitated, then added quietly, regardless of today's outcome, Barbara, know that you've changed our lives. Maisie's and mine, for the better. The simple sincerity of his statement warmed her. Before she could respond, Preston called from the doorway. Time to go, Thomas. Judge won't wait forever. With a final nod, Thomas collected his hat and departed. Barbara gathered Maisie, explaining they would visit the schoolhouse before joining her father at the courthouse. As they walked through town, Barbara noted increasing activity, townspeople streaming toward the courthouse, eager for the spectacle of conflict between Dustmere's most powerful man and the stubborn rancher who defied him. Will Daddy win? Maisie asked as they approached the schoolhouse, a modest building on the town's eastern edge. Barbara chose her words carefully. Your father stands for truth, Maisie. In the end, truth usually prevails, though not always as quickly or directly as we might wish. Miss Ellie said Mama believed that too, Maisie revealed. That truth is like water, it finds its way through any barrier eventually. The sentiment sounded like Mary Callahan, a poetic soul married to a practical man, their differences complementing rather than conflicting. At the schoolhouse, Miss Wilson, a competent-looking woman in her 40s, greeted them warmly. Maisie Callahan, my goodness, you've grown since I last saw you. She smiled at Barbara. Sheriff Preston sent word you might be coming. Maisie is welcome to join our lessons today. Thank you, Barbara said gratefully. I need to attend the hearing, but I didn't want Maisie exposed to potentially unpleasant proceedings. Miss Wilson nodded understanding. We're reviewing arithmetic this morning. Perhaps Maisie can show us what she's learned from you. After settling Maisie with the other students, Barbara hurried toward the courthouse. The building's steps were crowded with spectators, forcing her to navigate carefully through the press of bodies. Inside the courtroom buzzed with restrained excitement. Thomas sat alone at one table, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and steady gaze. Across the aisle, Grant conferred with two men in expensive suits, lawyers presumably imported from Cheyenne or Laramie. Judge Harmon, a stern-faced man with a neatly trimmed white beard, surveyed the proceedings with evident impatience. Barbara slipped into a bench near the back, not wanting to distract Thomas. Court will come to order, Harmon announced, banging his gavel. We're here to address the complaint of Maxwell Grant against Thomas Callahan, alleging threats and intimidation against Grant employees on Friday last. He peered over his spectacles. Mr. Grant, are your witnesses present? Grant rose smoothly. They are, Your Honor. Mr. Decker and Mr. Waite are prepared to testify that Mr. Callahan threatened them with bodily harm when they approached his property on legitimate business. And the nature of this legitimate business, Harmon inquired. A routine boundary survey, Grant replied easily, given recent disputes over cattle straying onto my land. Harmon nodded, then turned to Thomas. Mr. Callahan, how do you respond to these allegations? Thomas stood, his demeanor calm despite the stakes. I deny them categorically, Your Honor. I was nowhere near the north boundary on Friday. I was repairing fences on the western perimeter all day. Can you provide witnesses to corroborate your whereabouts? Not directly, Thomas admitted. However, I can provide witnesses who saw Mr. Grant's employees elsewhere at the time they claimed to have encountered me. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Harmon frowned. That's an indirect defense at best, Mr. Callahan. Additionally, Thomas continued undeterred, I wish to introduce evidence that casts doubt on Mr. Grant's standing to bring these charges at all. Grant's composed expression flickered briefly. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Callahan attempts to distract from the charges with irrelevant matters. If the complainant's identity is fraudulent, Thomas countered, that is hardly irrelevant. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harmon banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, Mr. Callahan. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence to support it? Thomas reached into his coat, withdrawing the telegram from Washington. Official Army records indicate that Colonel Maxwell Grant of the Confederate Cavalry died at Antietam Creek in September 1862. Grant's lawyers conferred hurriedly while their client maintained remarkable composure. Your Honor, one finally spoke. These allegations are absurd. Mr. Grant's military service is well documented. A clerical error in Washington hardly constitutes evidence of fraud. I agree, Harmon ruled quickly. Unless you have more substantial evidence, Mr. Callahan, we'll proceed with the original charges. Barbara watched the proceedings with growing concern. Judge Harmon's bias seemed evident in his quick dismissal of Thomas's evidence. Where was Preston? Had he succeeded in speaking with Eleanor Grant? As if summoned by her thoughts, the courtroom doors opened to admit Sheriff Preston. He moved deliberately to Thomas's side, speaking in low tones. Thomas nodded, his expression shifting from resignation to renewed determination. Your Honor, Thomas addressed the court, I request a brief recess to confer with Sheriff Preston regarding new evidence pertinent to this case. Harmon scowled. We've delayed enough today, Mr. Callahan. Present your evidence or proceed with the current charges. The evidence concerns potential federal crimes, Your Honor, Preston interjected, matters beyond local jurisdiction. This caught Harmon's attention. No local judge wanted to be accused of impeding a federal investigation. Very well, 15 minutes recess. He banged his gavel and retreated to his chambers. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as Thomas and Preston conferred intensely in a corner. Barbara rose, intending to join them, but found her path blocked by Grant. An impressive performance, he said quietly, though ultimately futile. Harmon won't rule against me regardless of Preston's theatrics. Barbara met his gaze steadily. Justice often arrives unexpectedly, Mr. Grant. Justice, he repeated with disdain, a concept invented by the weak to constrain the strong. He leaned closer. Remember my offer, Miss Hart. It expires when the gavel falls. I've already declined, she replied coldly. Grant studied her with calculating eyes. Loyalty to Callahan will bring you nothing but regret. He's a broken man fighting yesterday's battles. He fights for his daughter's future, Barbara corrected, a principle even you should understand. Something flickered in Grant's expression, a momentary crack in his confident facade. Before he could respond, Thomas approached Preston at his shoulder. Miss Hart, Thomas said formally, though his eyes communicated deeper meaning. A word, please. Grant stepped aside with mocking courtesy. By all means, I believe we've concluded our business anyway. As they moved away, Thomas guided Barbara to a quiet corner. Preston spoke with Eleanor Grant, he reported in hushed tones. She confirmed our suspicions. Her husband is not Maxwell Grant. Barbara's breath caught. She admitted it. Not directly, Preston clarified, but she revealed that the real Maxwell Grant had distinctive features, a missing finger from a childhood accident, a severe stutter when agitated. Features our Grant notably lacks. That's hardly definitive proof, Barbara pointed out. No, Thomas agreed. But combined with the telegram and other inconsistencies, it creates reasonable doubt, enough to request federal intervention. What about the missing women? Barbara asked. Did she know anything? Preston's expression darkened. She became extremely anxious when I mentioned them. Said I should check the abandoned mine shaft north of town. Then she abruptly ended our conversation. The mine was declared unsafe years ago, Thomas explained, closed after a partial collapse. The implications chilled Barbara. I think we need federal marshals and a proper investigation, Preston stated grimly. Beyond Dustmere's compromised authority. Judge Harmon returned, banging his gavel for order. Court will resume. Mr. Callahan, are you prepared to present your defense? Thomas rose confidently. Your Honor, in light of evidence suggesting federal crimes within your jurisdiction, I formally request this case be transferred to Territorial Court in Laramie, where federal marshals can conduct a proper investigation. Harmon's face flushed with anger. What evidence? What federal crimes? Potential identity fraud, mail fraud, and Thomas hesitated, glancing at the packed courtroom. And matters concerning missing persons, Your Honor. Sheriff Preston has received information warranting immediate investigation. Grant rose in controlled fury. This is transparent manipulation, Your Honor. Callahan throws wild accusations hoping to escape today's judgment. The information came from a credible source, Your Honor, Preston interjected. One intimately familiar with Mr. Grant's affairs. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom as spectators interpreted Preston's careful phrasing. Grant's expression darkened with dangerous comprehension. Judge Harmon appeared torn between his evident sympathy for Grant and the legal requirements of his position. Federal jurisdiction superseded local authority, refusing to acknowledge this could jeopardize his judgeship. "I find this highly irregular," he finally pronounced. "However, allegations of federal crimes cannot be dismissed without proper investigation." He glared at Thomas. "The charges against you are suspended pending review by territorial authorities. Court is adjourned until such time as jurisdiction is determined." The gavel's bang released a torrent of excited conversation. Thomas exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "A temporary victory," Preston cautioned. "Grant won't surrender easily." "But it buys us time," Thomas replied. "Time to gather concrete evidence." Barbara felt relief wash through her, tempered by awareness that they'd merely postponed the confrontation rather than resolving it. Grant remained free, powerful, and now acutely aware of their suspicions. As the courtroom emptied, she spotted Grant conferring intensely with his lawyers, his controlled demeanor giving way to visible anger. When he glanced in their direction, his expression carried unmistakable menace. "We should collect Maisie and return to the ranch," Thomas decided. "Grant will regroup quickly." Preston nodded agreement. "I'll send telegrams to the federal marshal in Laramie and the territorial governor. Request immediate investigation of the mine shaft and Grant's background." "How long until they respond?" Barbara asked. "Day or two if we're lucky," Preston estimated. "Meanwhile, stay vigilant. Grant's most dangerous when cornered." They parted ways outside the courthouse, Preston heading to the telegraph office, while Thomas and Barbara walked toward the schoolhouse. The mid-morning sun bathed Dustmere in deceptive tranquility, belying the tensions simmering beneath the surface. "Do you think Eleanor Grant will face repercussions for helping us?" Barbara asked as they walked. Thomas's expression grew troubled. "Almost certainly. Grant will realize she spoke with Preston." He sighed heavily. Another innocent caught in the crossfire. "She made her choice," Barbara reminded him. "Perhaps she's been waiting for an opportunity to break free." "Perhaps," Thomas conceded, though he sounded unconvinced. Few escape Grant's influence unscathed. At the schoolhouse, they found Maisie happily engaged in arithmetic exercises, her quick mind earning praise from Miss Wilson. She brightened further at the sight of her father. "Daddy, did you win?" Thomas knelt to her level. "Not yet, but we've made progress. We're going home now." Maisie gathered her things eagerly, bidding goodbye to her temporary classmates. As they left the schoolhouse, Thomas guided them toward the livery stable where they'd left their wagon. "Once we're home, we'll need to prepare," he told Barbara quietly. "Grant may attempt retaliation before federal authorities arrive." "You think he'd risk open violence?" Barbara asked, alarmed. "I think he's maintained his charade too long to surrender it easily," Thomas replied grimly. "And he knows what awaits if his true identity and crimes are exposed." They reached the livery stable where Thomas's wagon stood ready, their few possessions already loaded. The elderly stableman approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Got her hitched up when I heard court adjourned," he explained. "Figured you'd want a quick departure." Thomas nodded appreciation. "Thank you, Jenkins. Any activity I should know about?" "Grant's men left town about 20 minutes ago," Jenkins reported, "riding hard toward his ranch. And there's something else." He hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Eleanor Grant came through earlier. Valise in hand, bought passage on the southbound stage. Left before court concluded." Thomas and Barbara exchanged significant looks. Eleanor Grant had fled, either fearing her husband's retribution or abandoning a sinking ship. "When's the stage due back?" Thomas asked. "Tomorrow morning," Jenkins replied, "though with that storm brewing over the mountains might be delayed." Barbara followed his gaze to the western horizon where dark clouds gathered ominously, another complication in their already precarious situation. "We should go," Thomas decided, helping Barbara and Maisie into the wagon. "Thank you for the information." As they drove through town, Barbara noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere, townspeople watching them with speculative interest, shopkeepers pausing in their work to observe their passage. Word of the courtroom confrontation had spread quickly. "The town seems divided," she observed. "Some appear almost supportive." Thomas nodded. "Grant's influence has both benefited and damaged Dustmere. Not everyone appreciates his methods, but few dare oppose him openly." "Until today," Barbara noted. "Until today." Thomas agreed, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Sometimes all it takes is one person standing firm to embolden others. They passed the town limits, the road stretching before them toward the distant ranch. Barbara found herself scanning the surrounding landscape, rolling hills, scattered trees, rocky outcroppings, all potential hiding places for hostile eyes. Maisie, oblivious to the adults' tension, chattered about her morning at school. Miss Wilson says I'm advanced for my age, that I could join the older students for reading lessons. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Barbara encouraged, grateful for the child's resilience. Thomas drove with increased vigilance, his gaze constantly moving between the road ahead and the terrain around them. When we reach the ranch, he said quietly to Barbara, we'll need to prepare for possible siege. Grant knows we've contacted federal authorities. He won't wait passively for their arrival. The gravity of their situation settled heavily on Barbara's shoulders. What had begun as temporary sanctuary during her journey east had evolved into something far more dangerous and important. No longer a bystander, she had become integral to the Callahan struggle against a powerful enemy. As the wagon crested a rise offering the first view of the ranch, Thomas suddenly pulled the team to a halt. Barbara followed his gaze, her heart sinking at the sight below. Smoke rose from the Callahan homestead, not the controlled plumes of chimney fires, but the billowing black clouds of deliberate destruction. Even from this distance, they could see figures moving around the property with sinister purpose. Grant's men, Thomas said flatly, reaching for his rifle. They've moved faster than I anticipated. Barbara instinctively drew Maisie closer. What are they doing? Removing evidence. Destroying my home. Thomas's voice carried deadly calm. Ensuring I have nothing left to fight for. The map, Maisie whispered, her small face paling. Daddy, I left it in my special hiding place. Thomas's expression shifted from anger to alarm. When I thought you had it with you. At Miss Ellie's house, Maisie explained anxiously, when we were at the piano, I got scared and hid it in the bench cushion. I was going to tell you, but then the court thing happened. The revelation stunned them both. The precious document that had precipitated so much conflict now lay hidden in the heart of enemy territory. We can't return to the ranch, Thomas realized, surveying the destruction below. And we can't retrieve the map without risking Grant discovering its location. Barbara considered their limited options. Preston, we need to return to town, alert him to what's happening. Thomas nodded grimly, turning the wagon around. Hold tight, he instructed, urging the horses to greater speed. And keep your heads down. We're exposed on this road. As they raced back toward Dustmere, Barbara held Maisie close, trying to shield the child from the harsh reality of their situation. The Callahan home, Maisie's only security since her mother's death, was being systematically destroyed. Their future hung by the thinnest thread, dependent on federal authorities who might arrive too late. And somewhere in Dustmere, a desperate man with a fraudulent identity prepared his final defense against exposure, a defense that might include eliminating everyone who threatened his carefully constructed life. Dustmere loomed ahead as Thomas urged the horses to their limits. The wagon rattled dangerously over the rutted road, each jolt threatening to unseat its passengers. Barbara held Maisie tightly against her side, the child's face buried against her shoulder. Almost there, Thomas assured them, his knuckles white on the reins. Preston will organize a posse. Grant's gone too far this time, attacking a homestead crosses every line. Barbara wasn't so certain. Grant has considerable influence. Will the townspeople stand against him? They will if Preston presents evidence about the missing women, Thomas replied grimly. Even the most corrupt official can't ignore multiple murders. The word hung heavy between them. Until now, they'd avoided stating directly what they suspected, that the abandoned mineshaft contained bodies of women who had threatened Grant's carefully constructed identity. They thundered into Dustmere just as the church bell struck noon. Townspeople turned to stare as Thomas brought the lathered horses to a halt before the sheriff's office. He leapt down, helping Barbara and Maisie quickly to the boardwalk. Stay here, he instructed, striding toward Preston's door. I'll get... The door swung open before he reached it. A stranger emerged, a weathered man in a battered hat, wearing a silver star on his vest. Thomas Callahan, the man inquired, his voice carrying the flat cadence of official authority. Thomas stopped short. Yes, who's asking? Marshal Frank Benson, Wyoming Territory. The man extended a folded document. Got Preston's telegram. Rode straight from Medicine Bow. Relief washed over Thomas's face. Thank God. Grant's men are destroying my ranch as we speak. and we have reason to believe he's responsible for multiple disappearances. Benson's weathered face betrayed no emotion, though his eyes sharpened with interest. So, Preston mentioned, where is the sheriff? I assumed he was here, Thomas replied, glancing around in confusion. Office was empty when I arrived, Benson stated. Deputy said he rode out to the abandoned Silverleaf mine about an hour ago, following up on information received. Barbara stepped forward, Maisie clutching her hand. Marshal, the situation is urgent. Beyond the ranch destruction, we believe critical evidence is hidden at the Grant residence, a gold claim map that belongs to Mr. Callahan. Benson studied her with professional assessment. You'd be Miss Hart, I reckon. Preston's telegram mentioned you. He adjusted his hat thoughtfully. Let's sort this methodically. First, we secure the evidence Preston's investigating. Then we address the ranch situation and the missing document. The mine could be dangerous, Thomas warned. It's been unstable for years. All the more reason to join Preston immediately, Benson decided. If he's entered alone, he could be in trouble. He glanced toward the telegraph office. I've requested additional marshals from Laramie. They'll arrive tomorrow. Until then, we proceed cautiously. Thomas nodded agreement. What about Maisie? She shouldn't be exposed to whatever we might find. Benson considered the child, his stern expression softening slightly. Deputy Carter's wife can watch her at their home. Good woman used to handling difficult situations discreetly. Arrangements were quickly made. Mrs. Carter, a kindly woman with grown children, welcomed Maisie with maternal understanding. The child, sensing the gravity of events, clung to Barbara before releasing her. You'll come back? Maisie asked anxiously. Absolutely, Barbara promised, smoothing the girl's braids. Stay with Mrs. Carter and mind her instructions. We won't be long. Thomas knelt to his daughter's level. Remember what we discussed about being brave? This is one of those times. Miss Barbara and I need to help Sheriff Preston, then we'll return for you. Maisie nodded solemnly. And then we'll find a new home, since the bad men burned ours. The innocent question pierced Barbara's heart. Thomas's expression tightened, but he maintained composure. Yes, sweetheart, we'll build something better together. As they left the Carter home, Barbara noted Thomas's rigid posture and clenched jaw. She'll be safe there, she assured him. It's not her safety that concerns me at this moment, he replied darkly. It's what Grant has taken from her. Again. Marshal Benson approached leading 3 horses. Deputies lent us mounts. The mine's 4 miles north, faster than taking a wagon on those trails. Barbara eyed the horses with trepidation. Her experience with riding was limited to gentle park paths, not rugged terrain. Thomas read her hesitation. You can ride with me if you prefer. I'll manage, she replied with more confidence than she felt. Time is critical. Benson helped her mount a steady-looking mare, adjusting the stirrups for her height. She's gentle as they come, ma'am. Just keep a firm hand on the reins. The ride north proved challenging but manageable. Barbara concentrated on maintaining her seat as they followed a narrow trail through increasingly rocky terrain. Thomas rode beside her, occasionally offering guidance when the path grew difficult. Marshal Benson led them at a brisk pace, his experienced eyes scanning the landscape for signs of danger. Mine entrance should be just beyond that ridge, he indicated as they rounded a bend. Approach cautiously. If Preston's investigating what I suspect, we could be riding into a volatile situation. They dismounted at Benson's signal, tethering the horses to scrub brush. The marshal checked his sidearm, then nodded to Thomas. You armed? Thomas produced a revolver from his coat. Always these days. Benson turned to Barbara. Ma'am, perhaps you should... I'm coming, she stated firmly. I've been part of this from the beginning. The marshal assessed her resolve, then nodded reluctantly. Stay behind us. If trouble starts, find cover immediately. They proceeded on foot, climbing a rocky incline that offered cover from below. At the crest, Benson dropped to a crouch, signaling the others to do likewise. Below them, the abandoned Silverleaf mine sprawled across a barren slope, collapsing outbuildings, rusted equipment, and a dark tunnel entrance partially obscured by fallen timbers. Preston's horse stood tethered near the mine entrance, but there was no sign of the sheriff himself. He's inside, Thomas whispered. Benson nodded grimly. And he's not alone. He pointed to fresh hoofprints in the dusty ground. At least 3 other horses led away after their riders dismounted. Recently, judging by the clarity. Grant, Barbara suggested. Likely Washomer, Thomas agreed. If Preston discovered evidence here... Grant would eliminate it and any witnesses, Benson finished. He surveyed the scene with professional assessment. We need to approach quietly. Element of surprise may be our only advantage. They descended carefully using scattered debris for cover. As they neared the mine entrance, voices echoed from within angry, threatening tones that carried despite the tunnel's acoustic dampening. Foolish mistake, Preston, a voice Barbara recognized as Grant's declared. Coming alone, digging where you shouldn't. Territorial law gives me authority to investigate suspected crimes. Preston's voice replied, strained but defiant. What's in those crates, Grant? Or should I call you by your real name, Samuel Blackwood? A sharp crack echoed the unmistakable sound of a pistol striking flesh. Barbara flinched involuntarily. That name no longer exists, Grant snarled. Died at Antietam with the real Maxwell Grant. I merely inherited his identity, his reputation, his future, and eliminated anyone who might recognize you, Preston accused. How many women are buried in this mine, Blackwood? How many recognize the deserter who fled the battlefield in a stolen uniform? Another blow followed by Preston's pained grunt. Benson signaled to Thomas, indicating positions flanking the entrance. They moved with practiced stealth weapons ready. Barbara remained behind a rusted ore cart, her heart pounding. Enough questions. Grant's voice hardened. Finish it, Decker. Make it look like a cave-in. One more tragedy in an unstable mine. Benson nodded to Thomas, then stepped into the tunnel entrance, his voice ringing with authority. Federal Marshal, drop your weapons! Chaos erupted, shouts, rushing footsteps, gunshots reverberating deafeningly in the confined space. Barbara pressed against the ore cart, praying for Thomas's safety as the firefight intensified. Suddenly, a figure burst from the tunnel, not Thomas or Benson, but one of Grant's men bleeding from his shoulder. He spotted Barbara and raised his pistol with desperate intent. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. Barbara's teaching experience had included self-defense training, a necessity in Boston's rougher neighborhoods. Without conscious thought, she seized a rusted metal bar from the cart and swung with all her strength as the man approached. The impact jarred her arms to the shoulders. The attacker collapsed his weapon, discharging harmlessly into the ground. Barbara stood frozen, the improvised weapon still clutched in trembling hands. More gunshots echoed from the tunnel. Then abrupt silence fell. Barbara held her breath, staring at the darkened entrance, dreading what might emerge. Thomas appeared first, supporting a bloodied but conscious Preston. Marshal Benson followed, his revolver trained on Maxwell Grant, or Samuel Blackwood, whose once immaculate suit now bore dust and a spreading crimson stain at the shoulder. Barbara, Thomas called, relief evident in his voice. Are you hurt? She shook her head, dropping the metal bar with nerveless fingers. Your man tried to flee, she explained, indicating the unconscious figure nearby. Benson checked the fallen attacker briefly. He'll live, though he'll wish otherwise when he wakes. He secured Grant with practiced efficiency, binding his hands despite the shoulder wound. Samuel Blackwood, you're under arrest for identity fraud, mail fraud, obstruction of justice, and he glanced toward the tunnel's darkness. Multiple counts of murder once we've excavated what's in there. Grant's aristocratic composure had shattered, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. You understand nothing, he spat. I earned that identity, took it from a man too weak to use it properly. Everything I built in Dustmere was founded on lies and bodies. Preston interrupted, wiping blood from his temple. We found them, Blackwood. 6 women at least buried in that side chamber. Their personal effects still identifiable. Barbara felt sick at the confirmation of their worst suspicions. The mail-order brides, she whispered, the ones who disappeared. And others who might have recognized him from before, Preston added grimly. Including, we suspect, Mary Callahan's father. Thomas's head snapped up. What? Preston nodded painfully. Found a pocket watch with Beaumont engraved on it. Mary's maiden name wasn't it. The revelation struck Thomas like a physical blow. Her father disappeared shortly after giving Mary the gold map. We assumed he'd returned to Georgia. His voice trailed off as implications crystallized. Blackwood knew him from Savannah. Knew him and killed him, Benson confirmed. Likely feared he'd recognize the imposter when he came to Dustmere, claiming to be Maxwell Grant. Thomas's expression darkened dangerously as he stared at the bound man. You murdered Mary's father, then persecuted her family for years. All for gold. For everything, Grant Blackwood snarled. The gold was merely a beginning. Dustmere was to become a railroad hub, with me controlling every aspect. The empire Grant should have built if he hadn't died so pointlessly. Benson interrupted the building confrontation. Save it for your trial, Blackwood. We need to secure these prisoners and send for excavation equipment. He turned to Thomas. Your ranch situation can wait, Thomas decided, his gaze still fixed on Blackwood. Justice for these victims takes precedence. They transported the prisoners to Dustmere in grim procession. Word spread quickly through town crowds, gathering to witness the fallen empire builders' disgrace. By nightfall, additional lawmen had arrived from neighboring settlements, securing the mine site and beginning the solemn task of recovering remains. Preston, despite his injuries, coordinated efforts from his office. We'll need formal statements from both of you, he told Thomas and Barbara as a doctor tended his wounds. The territorial prosecutor is already en route from Cheyenne. What about Grant's Blackwood's assets? Thomas inquired. His businesses control half the town. Frozen pending investigation, Benson replied, entering with fresh telegrams. Including the Grant residence. Federal receiver will arrive tomorrow to begin sorting legitimate transactions from fraudulent ones. Barbara remembered with sudden clarity. The gold map Maisie hid it in Eleanor Grant's piano bench. We'll retrieve it first thing tomorrow, Benson assured her. No one's permitted to enter the property until then. Thomas rubbed his temples wearily. And our immediate concerns, my ranch is destroyed. My daughter needs shelter. The hotel's offered rooms for tonight, Preston said. No charge. Seems public sentiment has shifted dramatically in your favor, Thomas. Barbara placed a gentle hand on Thomas's arm. We should collect Maisie. She'll be worried. At the Carter home, they found Maisie asleep, exhausted by the day's events. Mrs. Carter reported she'd been brave but subdued, asking repeatedly when her father would return. Poor little lamb, Mrs. Carter whispered. Asked if bad men would keep taking her homes away. Nearly broke my heart. Thomas gathered his sleeping daughter, carefully cradling her against his chest with tender protectiveness. Thank you for watching her, he told Mrs. Carter sincerely. Your kindness won't be forgotten. At the hotel, they were given adjoining rooms, one for Thomas and Maisie, another for Barbara. The proprietor, previously distant under Grant's influence, now offered effusive assistance. News of Grant's true identity and crimes had transformed the town's dynamics overnight. After settling Maisie in bed, Thomas joined Barbara in the small sitting area connecting their rooms. Exhaustion lined his face, yet purpose animated his movements. I've been thinking, he began without preamble, about rebuilding. Barbara nodded encouragingly. The ranch. Not immediately, he replied, surprising her. The land remains valuable, more so with the gold claim formalized. But the house, he hesitated. It was always Mary's house, a shrine to what we'd lost rather than a home for the living. The admission revealed how much Thomas had changed since Barbara first arrived at his door. What are you considering instead? Dustmere will need rebuilding after Blackwood's corruption is excised, he said thoughtfully. With Preston's encouragement, I'm considering a position on the town council, using my military and agricultural experience to help establish proper governance. You'd move to town permanently? For a time, Thomas confirmed. Maisie needs stability, education, social connections, things the isolated ranch couldn't provide. His gaze met Barbara's directly. Things you helped me recognize she needed. The acknowledgement warmed her unexpectedly. She's a remarkable child. She deserves every opportunity. Which brings me to a question, Thomas continued, his manner growing more formal. Your train east departs in 3 days. Given recent events, I wonder if your plans remain unchanged. Barbara had been avoiding this very consideration. The past week had transformed her circumstances completely. What had begun as desperate necessity, accepting shelter with strangers, had evolved into something far more significant. She'd found purpose in teaching Maisie partnership, in standing beside Thomas against injustice, and an unexpected sense of belonging in this frontier community. I don't know, she admitted honestly. My position in Boston was terminated. I have no family awaiting my return. She met his gaze steadily. But I also have no formal position here beyond our temporary arrangement. Thomas took a deep breath as if gathering courage. Perhaps we could change that arrangement. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band, not ornate or expensive, but solid and genuine. This was Mary's. She would have wanted it used with purpose rather than buried in memory. Barbara stared in the ring, understanding slowly dawning. Thomas, I'm not proposing traditional marriage, he clarified quickly. Not yet. That would be premature for both of us. His expression grew earnest. But a partnership legal, respectable, beneficial to Maisie. You would have position, security opportunity to establish a proper school in Dustmere. I would have, he hesitated. Companionship, assistance, a mother figure for my daughter. The pragmatic proposal reflected Thomas's direct nature, honest, unembellished, focused on mutual benefit rather than romantic sentiment. Yet Barbara sensed deeper currents beneath his practical words. And if emotions develop beyond partnership, she asked quietly, a flush colored Thomas's weathered cheeks, then we would address them honorably. But I wouldn't presume or pressure. You deserve complete freedom in such matters. Barbara considered his offer carefully. Practical considerations supported acceptance, a security purpose, continuing her bond with Maisie. Yet she needed absolute clarity before committing. I would require certain conditions, she stated carefully. My teaching would remain my domain without interference. I would participate equally in decisions affecting our household, and I would need your support in establishing educational opportunities for all Dustmere's children regardless of background or circumstances. Thomas nodded without hesitation. Agreed on all counts. He placed the ring on the table between them. Consider it, Barbara. Take whatever time you need. The train doesn't depart until Saturday. Before she could respond, a soft sound drew their attention. Maisie stood in the bedroom doorway, tousled from sleep, but fully alert. Are you asking Miss Barbara to stay with us forever? She asked directly, her perceptiveness once again startling the adults. Thomas smiled gently at his daughter. I'm asking if she might consider it, yes, but it's her decision entirely. Maisie approached the table, studying the ring with solemn attention. That was Mama's, she observed, from the special box. Yes, Thomas confirmed. I thought she might approve of Miss Barbara having it, if she chooses to accept it. Maisie turned to Barbara, her expression serious beyond her years. You don't have to say yes just 'cause of me, she stated with surprising maturity. But I hope you do, 'cause you make Daddy smile again. The simple observation struck Barbara profoundly. She reached out, drawing Maisie into a gentle embrace. Thank you for your honesty, sweetheart. That's very important to consider. Thomas rose, lifting Maisie into his arms. Time for you to return to bed, young lady. We all need rest after today's events. As he carried Maisie back to their room, Barbara remained seated, contemplating the gold band before her. It represented not just a practical arrangement, but a profound shift in life trajectory. From Boston school teacher to frontier wife and mother, a transformation as dramatic as the Wyoming landscape itself. Yet something about it felt strangely right, as if the journey that began with abandonment at Dustmere Station had been guiding her toward this moment all along. The following days passed in whirlwind activity. Federal marshals secured the abandoned mine, recovering remains of 8 victims, 6 women and 2 men, including Mary's father. Samuel Blackwood, formerly known as Maxwell Grant, was transported to Cheyenne for trial along with his accomplices. Maisie's gold map was recovered from Eleanor Grant's piano bench, exactly where she'd hidden it. The document confirmed Thomas's legal ownership of both land and mineral rights, instantly transforming his financial circumstances. Eleanor Grant herself remained missing, though investigation revealed she'd purchased passage to Denver using her maiden name. Marshall Benson expressed doubt she'd been complicit in her husband's crime, suggesting instead that she'd been another victim trapped in a marriage to a man whose true identity she'd discovered too late. Thomas declined offers to purchase his gold claim, instead forming a modest mining cooperative with several Dustmere businessmen. The proceeds will establish a trust for Maisie's education, he explained to Barbara, and fund civic improvements Dustmere sorely needs. True to his word, he accepted nomination to the town council, working alongside Preston to restructure local governance free from Blackwood's corruption. His military experience and straightforward integrity quickly earned respect from citizens previously intimidated into silence. Barbara, meanwhile, received an unexpected opportunity. With Blackwood's assets frozen, the town found itself without a school teacher, Miss Wilson having departed weeks earlier. The school board, newly reconstituted, without Blackwood's influence, approached Barbara with a formal offer. We need someone of your qualifications and character, the chairman explained. Someone who understands both Eastern educational standards and Western practical needs. The position includes housing and a respectable salary. The offer resolved Barbara's most pressing practical concerns about remaining in Wyoming. She would have independence, purpose, and security regardless of her decision regarding Thomas's proposal. On Friday evening, one day before the eastbound train's scheduled departure, Barbara sat alone on the hotel balcony, watching Dustmere's lamps illuminate against the gathering dusk. Below, townspeople strolled the boardwalks, their manner more relaxed since Blackwood's removal. A sense of possibility pervaded the community wounds, beginning to heal opportunities emerging from corruption's shadow. A light knock interrupted her contemplation. Thomas entered at her acknowledgement, his expression carefully neutral. "Maisie's with Mrs. Carter," he explained. "They're baking cookies for tomorrow's memorial service." The town had organized a ceremony honoring Blackwood's victims, providing proper burial and recognition long denied. The event symbolized Dustmere's commitment to confronting its darkest chapter honestly. "That's good for her," Barbara observed, "participating in community healing." Thomas nodded, moving to stand beside her at the railing. "The memorial marks an ending, but also a beginning." He glanced sideways at her profile. "Much like tomorrow's train." Barbara turned to face him fully. "I've made my decision, Thomas." His posture stiffened slightly, bracing for disappointment. "I understand if the East calls you home. Your life there has roots and meaning." "Had," she corrected gently, past tense. From her pocket, she withdrew Mary's gold band, catching the lamplight with warm reflection. "My future, I believe, lies here, if your offer still stands." Thomas's controlled expression transformed with stunned hope. "It does," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want absolute certainty, Barbara. No obligation or misplaced gratitude." She smiled at his honorable concern. "I've considered everything thoroughly. The teaching position provides professional security. Your counsel role establishes community standing. Together we can build something meaningful for Maisie, for Dustmere, and for ourselves." Thomas seemed to search her face for any hesitation. Finding none, he slowly extended his hand. Barbara placed the ring in his palm, a gesture of trust rather than surrender. "I propose amendments to our arrangement," she continued, surprising him. "Rather than immediate marriage, a formal engagement period. 6 months to establish our individual positions in Dustmere, develop our partnership gradually, and ensure Maisie adjusts comfortably to our new circumstances." A smile tugged at Thomas's mouth, the expression still rare enough to seem remarkable on his serious features. Logical, practical, considerate of all parties. He took her hand gently. "I accept your amendments, Miss Hart." With deliberate care, he placed the ring on her finger. The simple band settled perfectly, as if designed for her hand rather than another's. "Mary would approve," he said quietly. "She valued courage and conviction above all else. You've demonstrated both abundantly." Barbara studied the ring, emotion tightening her throat. "I'll honor her memory," she promised, "and help Maisie understand the remarkable woman her mother was." "I know you will." Thomas hesitated, then slowly giving her every opportunity to withdraw, leaned forward to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Thank you, Barbara, for staying, for believing this place, these people deserve your gifts." The gesture, restrained yet deeply sincere, embodied everything she'd come to value about Thomas Callahan: his integrity, his respectful consideration, his capacity for tenderness beneath a stoic exterior. "We should tell Maisie," Barbara suggested, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. Thomas offered his arm formally. "Indeed, though I suspect she's anticipated this outcome since the moment she approached you at the station." Barbara laughed softly, accepting his escort. "Children often see truths adults overlook, connections forming before we recognize them ourselves." Together they walked through Dustmere's evening streets, acknowledging greetings from townspeople with newfound warmth. News of their engagement would spread quickly through the community, becoming part of Dustmere's renewal narrative, a story of endings and beginnings, of justice delivered and hope restored. Barbara glanced at the train station as they passed its platform, empty in evening shadows. Tomorrow's eastbound train would depart without her, carrying mail, passengers, and cargo toward distant destinations. But Barbara Hart would remain in Wyoming territory, building a life unimagined when she'd first arrived. No regrets, Thomas asked quietly, following her gaze to the station. Barbara smiled, squeezing his arm gently. None. Some journeys end where they begin, Thomas. Mine began at that station, abandoned and uncertain. It seems fitting it concludes there too, with purpose and belonging. As they continued toward Mrs. Carter's home, where Maisie awaited with flour-dusted hands and innocent wisdom, Barbara reflected on life's unexpected trajectories. She had come west seeking security through marriage to a stranger. Instead, she'd found something far more valuable, a family formed through shared challenges rather than convenient arrangement, a community worth investing in, and a partner who valued her strength rather than her submission. The last train east would depart without her. But Barbara Hart was exactly where she belonged. The end.